Chapter 527. In Afterglow City, Lu Xiaoyu rarely came into contact with powerful cultivators. However, with the strength of his divine sense, he could sense that there were dozens of weak fluctuations of spiritual vigor in the city. It was exactly the same as when he was in Pooh City on the Mother Planet. These were all cultivators who were groping their way forward. He did not disturb them. This was the rule of cultivation. It was shorter than he had expected. It was less than 2 months. He felt that there was no need to waste his time here. In the past month, he had passed the language barrier and the local customs barrier. Aside from the fact that it had nothing to do with the quest, it could be said that it was a successful short trip to the mortal world. The only pity was that the people here were too vigilant, and there were not many widows or anything like that. He carried a bookcase on his back. This time, it was a real one. It was produced locally. The key was that there were some imperial examination books inside. It was enough to pass off as genuine. He also knew that he did not have much time to carry this thing. Next, he would find an identity as a cultivator to blend into the cultivation world here. When that time came, it would be somewhat inconvenient to carry this thing. It was just fulfilling a childhood dream. Just like when he first came to Afterglow City, it was still drizzling. It was still a bowl of noodles and a plate of meat. The snacks in this shop were very much to his taste. He chewed slowly. In the late autumn drizzle, there was a different kind of mood. The shopkeeper hesitated at the counter for a long time. In the end, he pulled the waiter over and gently placed a tray in front of him. There were 14 blue pearls neatly arranged on it. "Are you going to leave? It's a pity that there is no wine today. If I knew that you were leaving, I would have left a corner for you. These blue pearls were not rightfully obtained by this small shop. Please take them back." This was an apology for his actions that day. It was just that he was still a little embarrassed. However, Lu Xiaoyu smiled very happily. He finally understood what human nature was. No matter how tough the exterior was, when the hard shell was broken, the inside was still soft. Where was the innate coldness? Innate viciousness? He reached into the bookcase and took out a pot of wine. This was a trick. In fact, he took it out from the storage ring. "It's all right. I'll treat you to a drink today." He took a cup and poured a cup for each of them. The innkeeper wanted to decline, but the aroma of the wine couldn't be concealed. Who in this line of work didn't like wine? It was easy to tell whether the wine was good or bad with just a sniff. Just from this soft and lingering aroma, one could tell that this was a good wine that they had never tasted before in their entire lives. Therefore, his mouth did not agree with his heart. While he was declining, his hand could not help but lift the cup to his mouth. He was an experienced drinker and knew how to drink good wine. He only took a small sip and left it in his mouth to savor the aftertaste for a while. When he raised his head again, he felt a hot stream flowing down his throat, and his whole body felt comfortable. Lu Xiaoyu understood a principle. The important thing was not to find out why people were so cold, but to believe in kindness, even if it was short-lived. This depended on the environment. If the environment was right, everyone would be a saint. Then, who was the one who created the environment? The local government? Or the cultivators hiding behind it? This time, when he left Afterglow, his goal was to go to Zhong Dynasty. Zhong Dynasty was not a city, but an area. It was the richest area of Hassa Star. It had the densest population and the most prosperous city. At the same time, it was also the place with the highest concentration of Dharma veins. Different from the monasteries of cultivation who were used to living in seclusion in the mountains and forests, if there was a cultivation ceiling and there was an insurmountable barrier, there would be a dead end. In fact, many cultivators preferred to enjoy life. How could he integrate into the world of Hassa Star normally? He couldn't waste time like he did in Afterglow City. He had to be fast and slow when he needed to be slow. If he entered the circle of laying foundation and then Jin Dan, it would be a drag. However, fortunately, there was a guest organization in the Dharma Veins Alliance of Hassa Star. It specialized in collecting individual Jin Dan cultivators and providing them with resources. It was unreasonable to support a guest from a different sect on a barren planet. Unless there was a reason, such as frequent conflicts. He didn't want to be a guest himself, but it would be easier to communicate with these guests. His past couldn't withstand a detailed investigation, whether it was his household registration or his Taoist roots. Here, he no longer hid his identity as a cultivator. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. When his Jin Dan aura was vaguely exposed in front of people, he didn't need to look for it deliberately. Naturally, some people inadvertently approached him, especially those guests of Jin Dan. They stood at the top of the world's food chain, but because there was no way to go up, they were content with enjoying life and doing nothing. Lu Xiaoyi found a place with the most cultivators and opened a small shop. It specialized in collecting some special cultivation materials, especially receiver crystals. On Hasa Star, receiver crystal mines were widely distributed. The sword vein controlled by Xianyuan only occupied one of the places with the best production and quality. There were many similar mines on Hasa Star, including the territories controlled by the Dharma veins. This was also something that the Law vein natives were dissatisfied with. Those high-quality mines originally belonged to them, but now they had been taken away by outsiders. They wouldn't be able to obtain a single strand of hair, and they would even have to develop a sword range force. No one would be willing to do such a thing. The function of receiver crystals was to fuse them into weapons, including flying swords, various magic weapons, spirit weapons, and so on. It could fundamentally change the range of use of the weapons. For a flying knife, even if it was made of ordinary iron, a cultivator could use his spiritual power to control it to fly around and kill enemies. However, there were limitations in controlling it. It was difficult to control it at will. Moreover, it consumed a lot of spiritual power and couldn't be used for a long time. In the world of cultivation, it was called the art of object control. The art of object control was at a higher level. In fact, it was like the sword of a swordsman and the magic weapon of a cultivator of magic. Not only was the art of object control fundamentally different, but more importantly, special materials such as receiver crystals had to be added into the weapons during the process of fusing so as to achieve the purpose of spiritual communication and control. The crafting technique of the Hasa Star was a kind of crafting technique that used the receiver crystal without restraint. It was widely used. Many of the crafting techniques were unnecessary, but there was no other way. After all, this place produced the receiver crystal. On the contrary, some of the most common materials in the fifth circle, such as hard materials and materials with the properties of the five elements, were rare and in short supply here. Their prices were much higher than receiver crystals. Xianyuan had known about this for a long time. However, there was no barter rule. Under the control of the sword vein, who would want to work hard to sell goods here? In particular, it was very difficult to enter and leave Hasa Star. During the 3 days of preparation, Lu Xiaoyi was keenly aware of this fact. Anyway, he brought a large number of storage tripod with him. Since he had nothing to do, he bought a large number of the most common materials of the five elements in the fifth circle. Firstly, it was a way to enter the local world of cultivation on Hasa Star. Secondly, it could make some extra money for him. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Chapter 528. P.S. A new January has begun. Thank you for your support. Let's continue to work hard, create more glory, and climb to new heights, one peak after another. During the event, Sloth will add 1 update for every 1,000 votes. There is no guarantee. Don't think it's too little. The last 3 days of September are really tiring. Please cast your guaranteed monthly votes. Thank you for your support. On the Hasa Star, the guests were the ones who had the highest demand for these 5 elements materials. These Jin Dan guests had no way to improve their cultivation. The only way to improve their strength was to improve their skills and tools. The limited 5 elements materials on the Hasa Star had to be given to the cultivators first, and then to the guests. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi's small shop quickly became famous, and it spread among the Jin Dan people in the Central Dynasty. Spreading the news was not good for Lu Xiaoyi's secret. After a long time, where did he get so many precious five elements materials? He was bound to become the target of suspicion, but he didn't care. All he needed was time. If he still couldn't find out the truth after a few years, even he would take the initiative to jump out, and no one would need to investigate. Because of this unique condition, his network expanded rapidly in a short period of time. Not only did he have some casual cultivators as guests, but he also had several Jin Dan cultivators. After a lot of transactions, he became friends, and with these friends, he had a foundation to communicate with them. Some scattered news on the Hassa star naturally reached his ears, and he didn't need to deliberately inquire about it. Over the past few months, the situation of cultivation on the Hassa star, the conflict between the sword vein and the form of coexistence between cultivators and mortals, these little things converged into Lu Xiaoyi's specific image of the Hassa star world of cultivation. Although he didn't know any real secrets, Lu Xiaoyi always believed that there were no real secrets in this world. It was better to start from small details than to deliberately inquire about them. Secrets could be hidden, but no one could hide the leakage of ideas in the details. And from these details, something could be seen, something real. This was not Lu Xiaoyi's superfluous actions. When he took action to resolve this matter, it would inevitably be accompanied by a storm of blood. This was not something that could be resolved with mere words. The deaths of the two Jin Dan brothers were proof of this. Before killing, he must have a basic understanding of the cultivation environment of Hassa star. Only then can he know what he is doing. Cultivators couldn't be timid just because they were afraid of karma, but they couldn't take karma seriously either. In the fifth ring, there were tens of thousands of years of great karma between the various sections. An individual killing was not worth mentioning, but here, all the karma would be shouldered by Lu Xiaoyi himself. This was no joke. Perhaps acting presumptuously here wouldn't affect him much, but once he formed this habit of not thinking about things, this kind of karma would accumulate until one day, he would be entangled by karma, unable to stop even if he wanted to. Gu Dong had Gu Dong's instructions, and Fu Feng had Fu Feng's opinion, but that was someone else's opinion. Lu Xiaoyi must have his own principles, and not follow others' opinions. A gust of wind stirred at the door, and a bearded cultivator came in. This person's name was Blue, and he was one of the Jin Dan cultivators Lu Xiaoyi first met here. He was also a guest of the Dharma Sect Alliance. He was forthright and didn't care about trifles. He was one of the few cultivators that Lu Xiaoyi could have a deep conversation with. "Brother Lu, I'm here again. This time, I want some earth-type materials. Last time, I was unlucky and destroyed a good spiritual weapon. This time, I'll try a different direction and see if I can change my luck." Lu Xiaoyi was all smiles. "Old brother Lan, with your level of refining tools, I think you shouldn't refine anymore, right? It's a waste of resources and a waste of feelings. If you have the time, you can take in a few more girls to carry on your family line. It's more meaningful than making spiritual weapons." Bluebeard chuckled and said, "Brother Lu, you're very wrong about that. Spiritual weapons can be used for a lifetime. If the time is not right, you can refine them and add them to the furnace. They can even block knives for you. A woman can be used for a lifetime? If you tell her to go east, she will go west, and you will have to block knives for her at critical moments. It's not worth it, it's not worth it." Bluebeard was a lone wolf who had been alone his entire life. He liked to drink and gamble, but his ability in the field of spiritual weapons was average. He was still in the exploration stage, so his success rate was very low. A lone Jin Dan cultivator like him didn't have a systematic system. How could Jin Dan have the time and energy to do these things before? It was only after he was lucky enough to successfully form a pill that he could free up his hands to do things that he couldn't do before. Alchemy was a direction, and so was spell formations. However, he was only interested in spiritual weapons, so he had his own interests. "Look at what I got for you." Bluebeard had a smug look on his face. He took out his storage ring and poured it on the table. A large pile of grayish-white crystals that looked like coarse grains of salt spilled all over the square table. Lu Xiaoyi picked up a handful and carefully examined them. His eyes were filled with surprise. "Brother Blue, what did you do?" Bluebeard laughed. "That's right. It's the minerals over there. Look at the quality, it's much better than what we have here." Receiver crystals were not rare in Whirling Star, but most of them were not of high quality. They were blue, green, purple, and other colors. Those who didn't know would think that they were good stuff. Only those who really knew would know that this kind of inconspicuous grayish-white receiver crystal was the best of the best. "Aren't these things used for offerings over there? Why are they flowing out now? If the swordsman from the upper realm finds out, won't something big happen? Old brother Lan, this thing of yours is good, but I, your little brother, am a little afraid to accept it." Bluebeard was disdainful. "Look at you, coward! The swordsman from the upper realm is gone, what are you afraid of? If we don't take this opportunity to get more, we won't get anything when the swordsman from the upper realm comes down in a few years." Lu Xiaoyi nodded and hurriedly kept the receiver crystal. He then took out some earth-type materials. Although it was not more than usual, the quality was much better. Bluebeard glared at him. "Brother Lu, you've been lying to me all this time? You have good stuff hidden away, but you only took out some low-quality materials to fool me." Lu Xiaoyi took it for granted. "You used to bring those low-quality receiver crystals here, and you want to exchange them for good stuff? We're trading high-quality goods against high-quality goods. It's only right that we trade low-quality goods for low-quality goods. Brother Blue, you've been traveling all over the world, can you find a better price than mine? All right, cut the crap. How many receiver crystals do you have? I'll take them all." Bluebeard was speechless. He was being cautious just now, but in the blink of an eye, he became greedy. However, this was normal. They were both Jin Dan, so what was this little risk? "Not now, you'll have to wait for a while. Don't be impatient, you'll have to put in some effort and take a few more turns." Lu Xie remained calm. He had been in contact with these people for so long just for this day. He must not be impatient and let these cautious rogue cultivators notice anything unusual. "Brother Blue, it's not that I'm trying to pry into your secrets. Cats have their own ways, and I don't want to cross the line. I'm just thinking that you're not on the right track. Don't leave any clues for others to find. I heard that the swordsman from the upper realm is very fierce. With our strength, I'm afraid we can't fight them." Chapter 529. Bluebeard expressed his understanding. "I can't blame you for being cautious. After all, this batch of goods fell into your hands in the end. But don't worry, this batch of goods was obtained through my friends in the Sword Mountain Range, and the procedures are complete. No matter how you think about it, it won't be related to you, the person who collected the stolen goods. Moreover, if they really find you, they would have found me long ago. We are all in the same boat." Bluebeard's words were very honest. There was no guarantee that if they found him, they would not implicate others. Everyone was in this bowl of rice, and the risk was their own. Who could guarantee others' safety? Individual cultivators like them had a lot of connections, so they were not loyal. It was normal for them to have connections with individual cultivators in the sword vein. They were just looking for a place to settle down. Who would really talk about orthodoxy? Lu Xie sighed. Who did this? They're too bold. The power of the upper realm cultivators is not something we lower realm cultivators can rival. But then again, without this incident, I wouldn't have gotten these high-grade receiver crystals. It's really a blessing in disguise. But old brother Lan, you should refine more spirit artifacts, especially defensive ones. If the upper realm cultivators come to us one day, you'll be the vanguard. There's no harm in making more preparations. Bluebeard was very unhappy. You better think of me better. What's cannon fodder? Am I that stupid? Let me tell you, you're a Jin Dan cultivator. Go out and explore more. Don't stay in this shabby shop all day to make money. You just follow the crowd and believe whatever the outside world says. Who says that the upper realm visitors must be killed by the Dharma lineage? Firstly, we don't have that ability. Secondly, what can we get? Are you tired of living a dull life and looking for trouble for the Dharma lineage? Lu Xiaoyu was puzzled. The Dharma lineage has been at odds with the sword vein for more than 1,000 years. This is a fact, right? The sword vein occupies the best place to produce receiver crystals. These were originally the commonwealth of the whirling cultivators. Now, they've become offerings to the outside world. Don't they resent the Dharma lineage? If I'm not angry, how can the Dharma lineage tolerate it? With cultivators from the upper realm present, would the Dharma lineage dare to make a move? You guests have been changing batches and batches of good food and drinks. Aren't you just holding it in so that if something happens, you can drag them out and release them into the sword vein? The only strange thing was that since the cultivator from the upper realm had been killed, why hadn't the law branch made a move yet? What were they waiting for? Wait for the upper realm to send someone down and crush the Dharma lineage to death? Blue Beard shook his head. Fellow Taoist Lu, you only know one side of the story and don't know the other. Think deeper! The cultivators of the motionless upper realm, even if the law vein and sword vein can't win in the battle, they won't be in danger of being destroyed. After all, we have the advantage in numbers. At most, we can lay low for a period of time and start all over again. This will give us a chance to rise again. If we touch the cultivators of the upper realm, we can't be sure whether it's good or bad. It'll be like when the upper realm first came thousands of years ago, killing people with one sword. Our native cultivators finally recovered after thousands of years. Why bother? Therefore, the higher-ups of the Dharma lineage have a bottom line. The bottom line is to firmly control the dispute within the internal forces of the whirling star. They will never mention the battle between the Dharma lineage and the sword vein, for fear of offending the upper realm. After all, the Dharma lineage doesn't want to drive out the forces of the upper realm. We can't do that. We just want to get some benefits from such offerings. What the sword vein is doing now, the Dharma lineage can do too. We can also provide receiver crystals for the upper realm. Why did they have to create a sword vein? It made everyone unhappy. Lu Xiaoyu seemed to understand something. So, when the cultivator from the upper realm died, the Dharma lineage didn't dare to act rashly? Blue Beard laughed. That's right. That's why I said that these old cows' noses are just tough on the outside but timid on the inside. They're quick to think but clumsy to act. They're overcautious and timid. They're not people who can do great things. An alliance is like this. There's the prestige of the upper realm above, and there are a few forces below that don't belong to each other. When there's a good thing, everyone will rush forward together. When there's a burden, everyone will push and reject. How can they be successful? So, it's only us, the guests of the three cultivators of true virtue, who can fish in troubled waters and benefit from both sides. Lu Xie sighed. If there's no fight, this guest position is a good place to go. Even I want to go. Blue Beard lowered his voice and laughed. Brother Lu, I see that you're honest in your dealings and never haggle over the small details, so I'll tell you the truth. If the Dharma lineage and the sword vein really fight, do you think us guests are cannon fodder? You're wrong. Lu Xiaoyu was very curious. Oh? What do you mean? Blue Beard said proudly. Inviting guests started nearly 100 years ago, when the first upper realm cultivator died. It was initiated by the sword vein. Think about it, there are only so many Jin Dan cultivators on planet Hassa, and the number of rogue cultivators is even more limited. When the sword vein invited guests, they naturally had the advantage in numbers. This forced the Dharma lineage to invite guests to fight back. But in such a chaotic situation, what loyalty is there to talk about? It's purely a competition of numbers. We don't ask the guests to really contribute when the time comes, we just ask that they don't cause trouble. If there's a big battle, people like us can't be counted on. It's not easy for everyone to cultivate to the Jin Dan level. Who would fight to the death for others? It's only the guests against the guests. Everyone is just putting on a show. We're all familiar with each other. The origin of these receiver crystals is just for show. The real battle is still with their masters. Tell me, when considering the casualties, how could the Dharma lineage alliance dare to cause trouble? Lu Xiaoyu was speechless. Sure enough, no one was stupid in the cultivation world, and no one could take advantage of others. Everyone was just a mountain of flowers and fruits. One side's words couldn't be trusted completely. Fortunately, there were many cultivators who came to him to trade, and there were many people who were from the real orthodoxy. Lu Xiaoyu could get different opinions from different people. On planet Hasa, the battle between the sword vein and the Dharma lineage was a big deal, and it was not a taboo. But no matter who it was, no one knew the real cause of the death of the two upper realm cultivators. There wasn't even a popular version. However, these people all denied that it was the Dharma lineage alliance. Of course, if he was on the other side of the sword vein now, it would be a different story. Lu Xiaoyu had been beating around the bush, and there was another important direction. Was there a possibility that the Dharma lineage alliance had visitors from other realms? This was also the main direction of Xuanyuan's Jianqiu Peak's suspicion. If there were visitors from the Supreme Realm or the Three Pure Ones, it would be easy to kill two fake Dan swordsmen. Unfortunately, there were no signs of this. Lu Xiaoyu had been in this place for more than a year, and he had only asked around. He had never thought of sneaking into the enemy's territory. How stupid would he have to be to believe that he could sneak in silently, and then happen to hear the real story outside a secret room? Even a novel wouldn't dare to write like this. It was an insult to his intelligence. Chapter 530. Lu Xiaoyu felt that he had a rough idea. He still needed to go to the sword vein to take a look. He was in the dark when it came to the Dharma vein, but he wanted to be in the open when it came to the sword vein. Because the flow of upper-grade receiver crystals was getting faster and faster, if he continued to dawdle, he doubted that he would be able to collect enough resources in 10 years, no, 8 years. Saha world may be small, but as long as there were humans, there would be endless conflicts. However, his plan was suddenly interrupted because of a piece of news brought by Bluebeard. Bad news! The cultivators from the upper realm are here. I'm going to travel. What are you going to do, Brother Lu? Are you going to stay here and make a fortune? Lu Xiaoyu was speechless. Traveling meant running away. At the very least, he had to hide and observe the situation before deciding on his next move. In the past 6 months, they had collected a lot of upper-grade receiver crystals from the sword vein. If the cultivators from the upper realm were to investigate, should they spit it out or not? If they did not spit it out, would they have to pay with their lives? Is it true? No one has come for the past 10 years. Why is he here when we're just starting to do business? Is he a swordsman from the upper realm? Don't tell me you've heard fake news. Bluebeard turned and left. It's up to you to believe it or not. I'm just doing my best as a friend. Whether it's the higher-ups of the Dharma vein or my friends in the sword vein, they all know the news. You're on your own. As Lu Xiaoyu watched Bluebeard disappear into the sea of people, he was also rapidly calculating in his mind. He was sure that this swordsman from the upper realm was a fake. The real guest from Xianyuan Peak was him. His life force was still intact, his soul lamp was still functioning normally, and only 2 years had passed since the start of the 10 years. There was no way Thousand Grace Peak would send a second sword cultivator over. Knowing the source of Xuanyuan's receiver crystals and being able to send a suitable swordsman, it was basically a coincidence that he was a cultivator from another realm. The only possibility was that he was from the Fifth Ring. Wei Sword Mountain and Firmament Sword Sect were on the same side as Xianyuan. It was impossible for them to send people over to make trouble. Then, it was obvious who did it. Other than the Cloud Peak courtyard of the Three Pure Ones, there wouldn't be a second place. Then, was everything clear? He didn't think so. What was the purpose of the Cloud Top swordsman coming here? Just because one person came, the Three Pure Ones could control Whirling Planet? This was too childish. In the Fifth Ring, all the major forces had their own colonial planets, from which they obtained more special resources. In principle, they should not interfere with each other, and should not invade each other. If you can destroy my resource land, I can certainly cut off your supply source. This is relative. No one knows better than the three pure ones what it means to attack an orthodoxy like Xianyuan. It was a very contradictory conclusion that Lu Xiaoyi couldn't figure out. Go back to the sword vein to expose this liar? Maybe he could do it because he had Xuanyuan's sword talisman. But if he did so, it would seem that the whole thing would deviate from his original path. Killing and chaos were inevitable. Even if he defeated all the heroes in the end, he would only get a broken sword vein, and a disloyal one. Although it was a little hasty, the current situation didn't allow him to be leisurely anymore. Then, it was time to end it. White Cloud Mountain was where the White Cloud sect was located. It was also one of the three main orthodoxies of Whirling Planet. Whirling Planet was not big, and it was also a low-level cultivation world. It could only support a few schools and forces. This was all they had. On this day, the practitioners of Qingshu Temple, Yellow Bud School, and White Cloud Sect gathered on White Cloud Mountain to discuss a major event. This was a major event related to the future of Whirling Planet. No one could stay out of it. Everyone! We have been hesitating. It started nearly 100 years ago. When there were practitioners from the upper realm in the sword vein, we were worried that we couldn't win. In the end, not only did we not get any benefits, but we also humiliated ourselves. When the practitioners from the upper realm were not there, we were worried that it would cause a misunderstanding. We have been hesitating for nearly 100 years. If we continue to hesitate, I don't think there is any need for an alliance. Let's just let it be. Close the door and be a coward. The one who spoke was Taoist Jufeng, the headmaster of Yellow Bud School. He was also a tough figure who was determined to destroy the sword vein. He always believed that whether they could win or not depended on fighting first. Moreover, he had no evil intentions towards the upper realm. It was nothing more than letting them mine the receiver crystal, and they could even provide more receiver crystals. Qingshu Temple's point of view was the opposite of his. Headmaster Yugong had always been known for his caution and never took risks. I think we should wait a little longer. There are always changes that we can use, but we don't need to be so anxious. In the past 100 years, 2 practitioners from the upper realm have been killed. This is the beginning of the change. Why can't we wait and see? We have waited for hundreds of years. What's the difference in a few decades? Taoist Jufeng disdained. Wait until when? Can I see it in my lifetime? The ancestral land of Yellow Bud School was where the receiver crystal mine of the sword vein was now, so he was more anxious than anyone else. This was a question of whether he had the face to go down and meet the ancestors. Master Yu still spoke softly. Less than 10 years. The immortal raft will definitely descend from the upper realm. When that time comes, everything will be clear. Jufeng sneered. Then the immortal will destroy the sword vein that he created himself? Do you understand what you are saying? We practitioners should fight against the heavens. You are waiting for a meat pie to fall, but what if a lump of iron falls? Are you going to be smashed to death with your neck up? Why can't you take the initiative to participate? Push for change? No matter what the result is, at least we have done our best. Immortal Being in Clouds looked at the 2 arguing Taoists and sighed. It had been 100 years, and the result was still the same. One was in favor of war, and the other was in favor. As for him, of course, he was the one who did not help either side. A tripartite balance of power, such a situation was classic. Don't quarrel, don't quarrel. After 100 years of quarreling, aren't you tired? Fellow Taoist Jufeng's initiative is very reasonable. Master Yu's prudence is also a blessing for my Waira. That Taoist Jufeng had long been tired of listening to him. He said impatiently, Immortal Being, can't you give a definite answer? Can't you make a decision in this lifetime? Be firm for once? After so many years, I think he shouldn't be called Immortal Being. Tumbler Being is more appropriate. Master Yu was also very dissatisfied this time. Immortal Being, you are neither partial nor partial. I know that in the end, the result will still be delayed. Since that's the case, why don't you just say it? 2 against 1, so that this fellow won't be noisy by our ears every day. Immortal being in clouds shook his head. I am neutral and will not express my opinion. Although the result is your Qinshu Temple's way, it doesn't mean that I agree with your point of view. This must be clearly distinguished. My opinion is that before the immortal raft arrives, we must come up with a response. If we act now, it will be too hasty. When the immortal raft arrives, it will be meaningless. I observed the sky at night, and saw a strange star flashing past. I think the change is just around the corner. Why don't you two wait and see? Chapter 531. P.S. Please guarantee the minimum monthly votes. Before immortal Elder Yunshang's voice faded away, an alarm suddenly sounded outside the hall. That was a sound that would only be heard when the mountain gate's great formation was broken through. The 3 of them came out together, but they saw a young Taoist in the sky with an elegant and graceful bearing. He was holding a white cloud sex Jindan in one hand and gently tossing it down. The 2 Jindan cultivators were a little dizzy. They only felt that this Taoist came suddenly, and his attack was even more strange. It was not the style of the Hassa star at all. They were thrown down in front of the 3 leaders. How could they not feel embarrassed? They shouted together and were about to rush up again with their spiritual weapons. However, they were stopped by immortal being above clouds. Stop! Master has already shown mercy. You don't even know it. Do you still want to humiliate yourselves? Immortal being above clouds and the other 2 looked at each other. They could see the surprise in each other's eyes. The 3 of them were basically the top gold core cultivators on the whirling star. Not to mention their cultivation, just based on their life experience, as long as any cultivator on the whirling star used their ability, they could almost guess the origin of the other party. Firstly, they were young and experienced, and secondly, they were limited in the domain. However, this person could easily capture 2 Jindan cultivators of the same realm. His whole body was shining with starlight. He was suspended in the air like a star in the starry sky. Even their divine senses were a little difficult to lock on him. With just a glance, they knew that this kind of cultivation method was a supreme method. It was not something that could be found on the Hassa star. Then, the origin of this young Taoist was very thought-provoking. Immortal being above clouds controlled his emotions and said, "It is an honor for you to come here. We have been waiting for a long time for you to come here. Since you have come in person, what can I do for you?" Lu Xiaoyi did not treat him as an outsider. He shook his body and entered the hall. "Come in and talk. Don't worry. The stars are shining tonight. It is the time to drink. Let me invite you to drink." Immortal being above clouds and the other 2 connected their divine senses again. The 3 of them had already guessed the origin of this young Taoist. All of them were excited. The tumbler was right. The changes that should come finally came. No one was a fool. As the 3 big sects that controlled most of the areas of the whirling star, they had a long history and some inheritances. Even if he didn't know the heavenly upper world personally, it was impossible to say that he didn't know anything about it. In the universe, how could there be a single orthodoxy? The more powerful a realm was, the more impossible it was for it to be a monolithic orthodoxy. If there was only one sword vein, then there would only be one orthodox Taoism sect. It was impossible. Xianyuan has been controlling Wero for thousands of years. Dozens of cultivators have come and gone. Although cultivators are careful with their words, there are always some who are extroverted and talkative. It is inevitable that they will say a few words to Jing. Therefore, whether it is Master Yu of the Qinshu Temple or the Fa Roly-Poly of the White Cloud School, their so-called waiting was not decided by one person. Rather, it was the decision of the entire school, a decision that lasted for several thousand years. The basis of his judgment was that if the upper realm was really a super-large bounded domain, then it was impossible for the sword vein to be the only big one. If there were other orthodoxies, then it would be inevitable for them to compete for resources. The whirling star had such a special product as the receiver crystal. Wouldn't it attract the attention of other orthodoxies except the sword vein? This was the opportunity they were waiting for. They didn't want to completely get rid of the control of the upper realm. Unless the whirling star's receiver crystal mine was exhausted, they would never be able to escape from the control of the upper realm. But they could make their voices heard in the competition for the receiver crystal resources between different orthodoxies in the upper realm, and seek the benefits that belonged to the local cultivators. This was the real reason why they waited for thousands of years. But they still needed to confirm it. Although this young man had a technique that no one on the whirling star had ever practiced, the universe was so big that anything could happen. After instructing the disciples to guard the door and not allow strangers to get close, they went into the hall one by one. Lu Xiaoyi naturally sat down on the main seat. He looked very relaxed, which made the three Taoists feel an unknown pressure. "Master," Yu asked carefully, "where are you from? Are you passing by or staying here for a long time?" Lu Xiaoyi said casually, "I'm from where I came from. It's not up to me to stop or stay. It depends on the host's hospitality." He didn't want to say where he came from. This was expected by the three Taoists. In the cultivation world, the most taboo thing was to fight openly. No matter what they thought, they always had to leave room for both sides to maneuver. Even the whirling star was like this. Before these upper realm cultivators achieved their goal, of course, they wouldn't reveal their roots. Taoist Zhu Feng tried to sound him out. "The flower is divided into two flowers, each showing a branch. Although the whirling star is small, it has two masters. Whether it stops or stays, the words of one master may not be useful." Lu Xiaoyi was unfathomable. "The universe is so big, I've never heard of a family with two masters. It's either a single master, a tripod, or a disorder. How long can a two-legged family last?" Zhu Feng meant that if you came to the whirling star, would you come into contact with both the Dharma vein and the sword vein? Or would you only come into contact with the Dharma vein? Although this Taoist technique was the most standard Taoist, things were unpredictable. It was better to be clear about some things. Lu Xiaoyi also answered simply, "I only recognize one master." The meaning behind it was memorable. He had never liked to talk like this. It was a pretentious hypocrite. However, in the cultivation world, this was the way to do things. It was also the tradition of the Dharma vein. If he still spoke as straightforwardly as before without any concealment, he wouldn't be able to achieve the effect at all. Immortal being above the clouds pointed out. "However, there's more than one guest. Two masters, two guests, aren't they a good match?" Lu Xiaoyi sneered. "There's only one dish. Who's going to enjoy it? Who's going to eat it? I think that the matters between the masters should be settled by the masters. The matters between the guests should be mediated by the guests. This way, the rules won't be broken. A guest from afar coming to visit but making a mess in the master's house is not the way of a guest. The master is hospitable, but without a master and servant, it's easy to be at a loss. It's better for everyone to clean the snow in front of their own door." The three of them understood. This Taoist from afar meant that he would deal with the swordsman from the upper realm, but the native sword vein would have to be dealt with by the Dharma veins. This was in line with the tradition of the cultivation world. No one would take care of everything for you. You could only take what you needed yourself. Xianyuan had been in control of the whirling star for thousands of years. Other than the first time he entered the bounded domain and showed his overwhelming strength, he never showed his strength in front of the Dharma veins again. This should be the way things were done in the upper realm. In order to avoid the karma of destroying the bounded domain, the natives had to do the hard work. Compared to the gains, these sacrifices were not unacceptable. For the whirling Dharma veins, the most intolerable thing was the rise of the sword vein. The benefits of resources were secondary. As for the dignity of the bounded domain, would a low-level cultivation celestial body have any dignity in front of a high-level existence? The three of them were connected and had made a preliminary decision. Chapter 532. Immortal Elder Cloud still wanted to finalize the details. If the guest ends up being a guest at the host's house, what kind of gift can he bring? He was asking for benefits. At the very least, it couldn't be lower than the sword vein's conditions, right? Otherwise, why would he change the guest? Lu Xiao sighed. How could he bargain? Qianqiu Peak didn't give him the right to do so. Moreover, when it came to benefits, once bargaining was opened, there would be countless troubles in the future. After all, there was inflation in the universe. Therefore, he had to suppress this dangerous tendency in the bud. There's no benefit. It might not be as good as the sword vein's conditions. However, if the host and guest become friends, they can also invite the host to return at an appropriate time. When Lu Xiao said this, the three old Taoists' eyes immediately lit up. They couldn't help themselves. Resources? What was that to them? It might be meaningful to the disciples below, but to them, who had already reached the ceiling, it was completely meaningless. However, returning to the guest's house was meaningful. It was very meaningful. It meant that they could go from a low-level cultivation world to a high-level cultivation world. It meant endless spiritual opportunity. It meant complete heavenly Tao rules. It meant the possibility of going one step further. Lu Xiao's words completely aroused the deepest desire in the hearts of the three people. To them, there was nothing more important than longevity. He didn't talk about benefits at all. Instead, he said slowly, although the guest house is relatively large, it can't invite many people at once. The environment is good, but it's more chaotic and the competition is more intense. I can't guarantee anything. To be honest, in terms of comfort and status, it's far inferior to Pasuo. If you go, I'm afraid you'll only be struggling ants at the bottom. Cultivators don't lie. Don't make promises. Don't tempt. If you give up stability, all you will get is an illusory hope. The more Lu Xiao said this, the brighter the three people's eyes became. What they were asking for was nothing more than this hope. Regular visits? Roly-Poly was still confirming. Follow the mining raft. Lu Xiao's meaning was very clear. Once in 100 years. How many cabins are there on the raft? This was asking how many people could go at a time. 3 cabins is the limit. Going too far is as bad as falling short. This was telling them that they could only take 3 cabins at a time. Any more and it would affect the foundation of Hasa planet. Immortal Wang Shangyan's heart was set. He knew that the 3 quotas were clearly given to each of the 3 sections. He could not ask for too much, so he had to strike their palms and make an oath. Taoist Zhu Feng, who was beside him, suddenly interrupted him. I've heard that the upper realms techniques lead directly to the Great Path. It's very mystical. I wonder if you can demonstrate it? This Taoist, who had always been impatient and straightforward, was actually very cautious at the last moment. This would depend on his strength. Otherwise, he would not be able to deal with the swordsman from the upper realm in the sword vein. All of this was just a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Lu Xiao smiled without speaking, yet the phenomenon of the stars in his mind had been activated abruptly. Instantly, the 3 of them felt as if they were within a boundlessly vast vortex of stars, and they were unable to struggle or resist it. They were drifting along in the river of starlight. They stirred up their spirits, wanting to escape from such a phenomenon of the stars, but they realized that they were as weak as ants within it. This was the power of Lu Xiao's spirit that had increased tremendously after he formed his Aurous core. He was close at hand, and he suddenly activated it. The origin of the stars and the powerful spirit energy made it impossible for the 3 strongest spell cultivators of planet Hasa to escape. Their strength lay in their magical power cultivation, but in the field of spirit they were far behind. Furthermore, they had never come into contact with the celestial system, so they had no idea how to deal with it. At this moment, if Lu Xiao wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as flipping his hand. In a short time, Lu Xiao withdrew his vortex of stars. He was not really killing them. Furthermore, no matter how strong his spirit was, it was still difficult for him to control 3 late-stage Gene Dan cultivators. Therefore, it was good that he had made his intentions clear. He withdrew it in one go. The atmosphere at the scene was strange. The 3 spell cultivators did not seem to have any abnormalities on the surface, but in fact, each of them sank their spirit into their Naiwen to check if they were injured. What made them feel at ease was that there seemed to be no abnormalities. It was too scary. Such a cultivator who had just advanced to Gene Dan could crush the 3 of them who had formed their Aurus cores for more than 1,000 years. The power of the upper realm was incredible. They knew very well that among the cultivators from the upper realm, only those who were in the early stage of Gene Dan could enter planet Hassa. Once the realm was high, it was possible to trigger the heavenly tribulation. However, they were different. They grew up locally and were in line with planet Hassa's heavenly axiom. They would not be affected by lightning. They thought that because of their deeper cultivation, they would always have the right to speak when dealing with the cultivators from the upper realm. Now, it seemed that they had thought too much. In the Gene Dan stage, spirit was more important than magical power. The 3 of them finally made up their minds. Immortal being above the clouds said seriously, "In that case, please allow us to prepare for a few days. We will immediately set off for the Sword Vein. I wonder if Master..." Lu Xiui stood up, and his body floated out of the hall. "You know where I am. You just have to inform me before you start." As soon as he left, Zhu Feng and Yugong turned their gazes to Tumbler. Tumbler laughed dryly. "He opened a shop in the city. I just found out not long ago, so I didn't have the time to inform you too. I don't have the ability to predict, I'm just using it as an excuse." The 2 of them were extremely disdainful. Before this, he was still pretending to be a prophet. However, now was not the time to discuss this. Regarding how to attack the producer of the receiver crystal, although they already had a plan, there were still too many areas that needed to be perfected. The combination of personnel, the route of the army, the level of the attack, the coordination between the inside and outside, and so on, there were too many things to be done. They had waited for thousands of years, just for this east wind. Now that the east wind was here, although it seemed hasty, the 3 of them were full of confidence. It could not be fake. The ability could not be faked. The sharpness of the sword vein and the vastness of the stars were 2 completely different concepts. After cultivating for hundreds of years and coming into contact with countless swordsmen, they still had this bit of insight. The key was that there was already a swordsman from the upper realm coming down from the sword vein. It seemed reasonable for an upper realm spell cultivator to come here. This was the inertia of human thinking. If they missed this opportunity, Lu Xiaoyi would have to put in a lot of effort to obtain the recognition of the spell vein. This was the limitation of the knowledge of cultivators from small places. They did not know that in the upper realm, the cultivation orthodoxies had already begun to integrate in the hundreds of thousands of years of development. There was me and you in me. Purity was no longer synonymous with advancement. The current trend was to have a hybrid advantage. No matter what orthodoxy it was, as long as it was useful to them, they would use it. The fundamental method of the Xianyuan sword vein was basically plagiarized. In the Tao of Arts, the current Taoists had also begun to copy the combat orthodoxies. Only by learning and integrating could they improve. They could not understand it at their current level. Chapter 533. The Sword Vein Mountain was the place with the highest quality of crystal ores on planet Hassa. It was also the territory of the Sword Vein. On top of a mountain peak that was not very tall, several tall and straight figures stood against the wind. Their ancient sword robes, high crowns, and sharp eyes clearly showed their identity. Sword Master! According to the insider news, the Spell Vein Alliance is secretly mobilizing. Judging from the deployment of personnel, it may be true this time. A young Gene Dan swordsman reminded him from behind. The news had been spread a few days ago. On planet Hassa, which was not big, large-scale deployment of cultivators was difficult to hide from the eyes of people who wanted to know. It was the same for the spell vein. In fact, it was the same for the sword vein. As soon as they gathered here, the spell vein alliance would immediately know. However, the sword master had been non-committal, which made the high-level swordsman of the sword vein a little confused. The sword master Qinjiang was the most amazing person in the history of the sword vein on planet Hassa. He built his foundation at 20 years of age and formed his essence at 100 years of age. His sword skills were unprecedented. Although they were all Jin Dan swordsmen, the core Jin Dan of the sword vein knew that even if they joined forces, they might not be a match for the sword master. The spell vein had more people, but they were not afraid. Because of the tradition passed down from Xianyuan, swordsmen were never afraid to fight against the odds. Moreover, with the sword master, they might not be at a disadvantage. Qinjiang looked into the distance. After a long time, he asked, "Fighting has never been the most important thing. The dispute on planet Hassa can't be solved by fighting. The sword vein will not lose, and the spell vein will not die. We know this, and they know it too. The question is, why now? The emissary of the upper world has just arrived. Is this the time to start a fight?" No one could answer him, because this was also the question everyone had. "Get ready! It's not normal to be completely indifferent. What's the point of talking about tactics in a war between cultivators? Let's gather and fight. Don't leave anyone in the crystal mine. I'll talk to the upper cultivator and see what he has to say." Everyone nodded and scattered in all directions. On Hassa planet, the shadow of the conflict between the sword vein and the law vein had always existed and had never disappeared. Therefore, everyone was mentally prepared for this. In fact, the worst thing was that this kind of preparation would take hundreds or even thousands of years. The fact that the boots were still on the ground made the swordsmen frustrated. To these swordsmen, having a chance to solve the problem meant that they wouldn't have to be on guard all the time for at least hundreds of years. They never thought that they would fail. Because of the sword master. Because there was a swordsman from the upper realm. However, this confidence had been lacking for the past 100 years. Due to the mysterious deaths of the swordsmen from the upper realm, they had to bear a heavy burden. Qinjiang's body swayed as he leaped over a few mountain ridges and landed in a luxurious manner at the foot of Sword Rack Mountain. In the courtyard, a Taoist was closing his eyes in concentration. "You shouldn't be here now. Instead, we should be thinking about how to deal with the threat from the Dharma meridians." The Taoist didn't even open his eyes. Qinjiang was very courteous. "Senior brother Bai Ti. The law vein is coming aggressively this time. It looks like they're serious. I'm a little curious. Why did they choose to make a move now? Not long after you came here? We Sword Vein have the confidence to defeat the Law Vein. However, I'm worried that the Law Vein has other plans. If an accident happens, how much support can you give us?" Taoist Bai Ti spread his hands. "I'm new here. How can I know the specific grievances between you two? I have confidence in the scale. When it's time for me to make a move, I'll naturally make a move. However, I want to remind you that Xianyuan gave you the orthodoxy and inheritance for you to use at critical moments. You shouldn't rely on Xianyuan for everything." These words were very rude. However, Qinjiang couldn't refute them. Historically speaking, the orthodoxy of the sword vein on Hassa planet was indeed built by the visitors from Xianyuan. They struggled for thousands of years to achieve their current achievements. In terms of subordinates, Xianyuan was their master. They should obey unconditionally. Taoist Bai Ti's tone softened, and he was no longer aggressive. "I'm new to Hassa planet. Of course, my focus should be on Xuanyuan's most important crystal mine. Therefore, I will guard the mine. As for your battle, an orthodoxy like Xianyuan has never been afraid because of a small number of people. I've taught you this for thousands of years. Now, it's time to take it out and see how good it is." Qinjiang's eyes were filled with determination. "I won't let senior brother down." Taoist Bai Ti sighed as he watched Qinjiang leave in a hurry. However, he couldn't enter the state of concentration like before. He wasn't cultivating at all. He was suppressing his cultivation, because a heavenly tribulation could descend at any time. Of course, he was not a swordsman from the Qianqiu Peak in Xianyuan. After Xianyuan sent Lu Xiaoyi, if they didn't see the abnormality in his soul lamp, they would never send another cultivator. Xianyuan had many mineral stars like this in the universe. They all needed to be guarded by people. The cultivator's ability, the environment of the star, the possible impact on the cultivator with potential, and other factors had to be considered. Even if Xianyuan was a top sect in the fifth ring, it was impossible for them to take care of everything. It was impossible for them to put several Jin Dan cultivators on a mineral star. It would be a waste. In particular, Hasa planet was very special. It was very difficult to enter and had a special heavenly tribulation. As Lu Xiaoyi guessed, he came from the Yunning courtyard of the Three Pure Ones, which was the only swordsman force on the fifth ring that could oppose the sword vein. However, he didn't come to Hasa planet recently as Lu Xiaoyi thought. The Three Pure Ones' plan was not so shallow. In fact, more than 90 years ago, when Jin Dan, the guardian of Xianyuan, had an accident, the Three Pure Ones got the news through their own channels. It had to be said that the old Dharma branches were very powerful. They were everywhere in the middle and lower levels. When they realized that Xuanyuan's most important mineral star on Hasa planet had changed, they immediately responded by sending cultivators. Their purpose was to add fuel to the fire and muddy the water. However, the Three Pure Ones were smart. They didn't send Lord Yuaning to rob people, and they didn't even send Jin Dan to cause trouble. They sent a cultivator of Zhuji stage. At that time, Lu Xiaoyi hadn't even shown off his power at the fish-jumping cliff yet. This was a foolproof plan. Due to the principle of fighting and scheming among the big sects on the fifth ring, one of the most important rules was that the middle and lower level cultivators could do whatever they wanted, especially the cultivators of Zhuji stage. The purpose of sending a cultivator of Zhuji stage was that even if the cultivator destroyed your mineral star, it was still within the scope of the rules. If the sword vein couldn't even deal with a cultivator of Zhuji stage, then they were useless. They wouldn't have the face to wreak havoc on the mineral stars of the Three Pure Ones in the universe, unless they also sent a cultivator of Zhuji stage to cause trouble. Not only did they destroy the foundation of the sword vein, but they also didn't cause a big conflict in the universe. This was the orthodox way of doing things. They let you know that he was up to no good, but you couldn't find any evidence against him. Turquoise Taoist was a man of sacrifice sent to carry out this task. Chapter 534. Of course, as a laying foundation cultivator, he couldn't cause much trouble on the Hasa star. But don't forget that there were still 70 or 80 years before the next round trip of the mining raft. This period of time was enough for a laying foundation cultivator to become a Jin Dan. Because he had the support of the most complete reserves of elixirs of the Three Pure Ones, and he had the potential to break through to the upper state among the Three Pure Ones, even in a place like the Hasa star where the rules of nature were not complete, Bai easily became a Jin Dan here. But he didn't try to sneak into the sword vein. He knew very well that in a small place like the Hasa star, when a force wanted to investigate his background, it would be difficult for him, an outlander, to hide. He might as well stay outside first. From this point of view, he was actually as cautious as Lu Xiaoyi. His task was very simple. Taking advantage of the fact that Xianyuan Jin Dan died on the Hasa star, he waited here for an opportunity to sow discord between the indigenous cultivators and Xianyuan to achieve the purpose of affecting the output of receiver crystals on the Hasa star. After lurking here for decades, he found that as a casual cultivator, even if he was a Jin Dan, he could still affect the process on a large scale. Those who could reach this level of personal ability were all outstanding cultivators. How could they be easily bewitched? Over the years, the most active thing he did was to kill the second Jin Dan sent by Xianyuan to the Hasa star. It was not difficult for him. He was just a fake Jin Dan with limited strength. But he was a Jin Dan on the right path. He also had all kinds of trump cards given by the school before he came here. But it was still useless. The connections he had in the Hasa Star for decades only existed in buying and selling receiver crystals of the sword vein among casual cultivators. The purpose of doing this was to make the emissary of Xianyuan dissatisfied with the sword vein of the Hasa Star. In addition, 2 people died in a row. Maybe something would happen. In the world of cultivation, one must be patient. To achieve a goal, killing 1 or 2 people could not solve it. He was alone and weak, and he didn't have enough time. Even if his aptitude was outstanding and his mind was nimble, it would still be very difficult for him to stir up a storm by himself. No matter how weak the Hasa Star is, it is still a mature cultivation system. The power of individuals is very limited. The worst thing was that he realized that he didn't have enough time. The danger came from the whirling environment. When visitors from other regions were in Jindan, it was very easy for them to attract heavenly tribulations as long as their cultivation levels were slightly higher. When the 3 pure ones sent him here, they had considered this problem very carefully. Therefore, they sent a foundational cultivator, a special foundational cultivation method, and even a secret potion that could suppress the cultivation level. All these things did help him survive on planet Hasa. However, as his cultivation level increased involuntarily, and he had to increase his strength to protect himself, the secret potion became more and more difficult to hide the growth of his cultivation level. For the past few decades, he had been suppressing himself from entering the middle stage of the Jindan realm because he was afraid that he would not be able to conceal it. But now, he realized that it was getting more and more difficult. His dantian had already swelled up like a drum, and he had entered the stage where he had no choice but to raise his level. So he knew that he didn't have much time left. After careful consideration, he decided to take the risk and use the last resort. He directly pretended to be a messenger of Xianyuan and directly interfered. He had a reason to do so. First, Xianyuan sent the swordsman to guard planet Hasa very slowly this time. Second, he didn't lack Xuanyuan's token, the sword figure. The 3 pure ones were very careful and had prepared all kinds of plans. This was a difficult task. The purpose of the task was constantly changing as time went on. Compromise. This was the real world of cultivation. Unless you had an overwhelming cultivation level of yuaning, you could only go with the flow here. Under the general trend, either he nor Lu Xiaoi could expect the script to evolve according to their own ideas. Billy had realized that the situation was going out of control. The world of cultivation on planet Hasa was indeed getting more and more chaotic, but it didn't seem to be the kind of chaos that he wanted. The strange movements of the cultivators with Dharma meridians made people unable to see the real purpose behind it, so he could only prepare for the worst. His preparation was the crystal mine, which was also the most basic and direct way. It was also the easiest way to expose his real identity. However, considering his limited life, it didn't matter. He had been worried about the cultivators guarding Xianyuan for a long time. He didn't know if Xianyuan had other plans or if Xianyuan had already arrived and was hiding in the dark like him. Anyway, he had realized the danger, so he just needed to go at his own pace. Qinjiang gathered all the swordsmen on the top of the sword mount. For thousands of years, with the help of Xuanyuan's skills, the sword vein gradually became prosperous. Now, there were more than a dozen Jindan swordsmen. Because of the nature of the orthodoxy, even though the inheritance of the external sword from Xianyuan was not complete, compared with the local Dharma meridians of planet Hasa, all of them were top fighters. This battle will end the dispute between Dharma meridians and swords on planet Hasa for thousands of years. The first is the inheritance of the sword vein, and the second is the gain and loss of the crystal mine. 1 is 2, 2 is 1. I hope that everyone will work hard and fight bravely to determine the status of the sword vein in planet Hasa. His prestige in the sword range was very high. Firstly, it was because of his extraordinary strength. Secondly, it was because of his fairness in handling matters. He was the most outstanding leader of the sword range in the thousands of years since its establishment. It was also under his leadership that the sword range was able to compete with the Dharma range in substance. However, the swordsman's personality determined their way of doing things. They couldn't hold back their words and were unwilling to hold back their thoughts. One of the Jin Dan said loudly, "Swordsmen should move forward bravely without fear of death. We don't need the sword master to tell us this. What we want to know is this battle for the sword vein? Or is it for Xian Yuan from the upper realm? If it's for Xian Yuan, why isn't BD participating? Even if it's just for show, isn't all of this caused by the receiver crystals from the upper realm?" This Jin Dan's words resonated with many swordsmen. Xinjiang sighed. Every family had their own difficulties. In the sword vein, the biggest difficulty was that when the swordsmen grew stronger, the idea of independence became the mainstream. They didn't want to continue being a minor from the upper realm. Their lifelong pursuit was to manage the mine well and receive the tributes. This was what humans were like. They were never satisfied and always pursued independence. They would never be loyal to you for a lifetime or several lifetimes just because you gave them food when they were in trouble. Perhaps in the early days of the sword vein on planet Hassa, those few generations were grateful to Xian Yuan for his help. However, after hundreds and thousands of years, this gratitude became weaker and weaker. They were more willing to treat the relationship between the two parties as equals. You provided me with skills and resources, and I gave you precious receiver crystals in return. This was a form of transaction. There was no dominant or dominant relationship. It might sound ungrateful, but in reality, this was the trend in any world. There was no debt of gratitude that could last for hundreds or thousands of years. Chapter 535. P.S. Happy Double Festival. Happy forever. For your happiness, no matter how hard I work, it's worth it. During the double event period, please cast your vote. After this period, the double effect will no longer be available. Happy holidays, good food, good books, and sloth will sing for everyone here. Xinjiang had to suppress this thought. Before he understood Xuanyuan's attitude, he couldn't let his junior brothers do whatever they wanted. If you can't defeat the challenge of the Dharma lineage, if you can't prove yourself, it's useless no matter what you think. If you want to negotiate with the upper realm, you have to at least show your worth. Xinjiang pointed to the west. He already understood that this collision of the Dharma sword and Dharma sword would have a profound impact on the cultivation world of Hassa Star. He just didn't know if the final result would be as they wished. Lu Xiaoyi and the Hassa Star's Dharma lineage were flying in the sky together. Their target was the east. More than 50 Jin Dan had taken up half of the Dharma lineage. In this regard, Hassa Star was stronger and more aggressive than his home planet. This was also a disguised form of the saying, "One is marked by one's environment." If you were close to the Chaoguang realm, you could only live your own life. If you were close to the fifth ring, all kinds of situations were inevitable, whether you liked it or not. His thoughts were a little scattered. Based on the time and distance, after nearly 200 years, the fifth ring's current trajectory was beginning to approach the airspace of his home planet, right? Unfortunately, he was still a Jin Dan who couldn't fly across the universe. Even if he could become a nascent soul one day, he would definitely have crossed this airspace long ago. It was melancholy. He quickly pulled his thoughts back. He actually wasn't sure about the current situation. In his intuition, he realized that his preparations for the past 2 years were actually a bit of a waste of time. Not everyone had the talent to deal with cultivation affairs. It was easy to think, but difficult to do. Ambition was higher than the sky, but luck was thinner than paper. A lot of plans and considerations were made, but the end result was that they were useless. In fact, this was also the problem of most cultivators, including the sects and forces. In the end, you would understand that plans were meant to be changed, and planning was meant to cause accidents. Many great events were actually the continuous collisions of countless accidents and coincidences. especially when your realm and strength were not enough to dominate an area. His intuition told him that the problem lay with the sword vein itself. From the moment he accepted this mission, he had this feeling. This was because Qianqiu Peak's method of dealing with the whirling planet's mineral source was missing a very important part. They did not give this low-level cultivation realm a way to progress. Why did this happen? There could be many reasons for this. It was inconvenient to enter and exit the whirling star. Xianyuan was not willing to accept Jin Dan cultivators. Lu Xi was also born in the mortal world. He could understand the desire of the cultivators in the mortal world. When generations of cultivators were injured at the Yuanying Gate, they were unwilling to give up. This was especially true for sword cultivators with unruly ideals. If they didn't have such a philosophy, they wouldn't be real swordsmen, and they wouldn't have understood the true meaning of being a swordsman. If such a belief was formed, it was only a matter of time before something happened. That was why he started with the Dharma vein. As he expected, the Dharma vein was still as stable as their orthodoxy. This was also something determined by their beliefs. As for the fake Xianyuan emissary, he even suspected that it was just a self-directed act by the sword vein. Everyone was wearing a mask, so an outsider like him couldn't really blend in. It was harder to find the truth by investigating. The best and fastest way was to create or provoke a fight. Find possible clues in the fighting and killing, and discover the truth. He was a person who didn't want to do anything, but as long as he did something, he wanted to do it to the best of his ability. Maintaining the next mineral source was the simplest task. With the ability of his sword, he could easily do this. This would also make all the conspirators wary and not dare to act rashly. However, what about after he left? The problem was still not solved. The swordsman sent by Xianyuan would still be in danger. He, Lu Xiaoyi, shouldn't let others clean up after the places where he, Lu Xiaoyi, had taken action. He already had a little of the swordsman's pride. This was not a massacre, he was just bringing forward the time of the conflict between the two sides. Perhaps, he could find something from this. He could only take advantage of conflicts and blood feuds. If both sides were at peace, then he wouldn't be able to gain anything. Planet Hassa was a very special place. Some of the abilities of major cultivators could not be used here. Yuanying, forceful suppression, and mental invasion was a very simple task. But now, it required a Jin Dan like him to rack his brains. A figure approached them, and at the same time, a familiar voice sounded. The sword vein has gathered all the swordsmen and is ready to fight. A total of 14. However, the swordsman from the upper realm didn't follow them. I heard that he's guarding the crystal mine alone and watching the tigers fight. Seeing the meaningful look in Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, Immortal Elder Cloud was afraid that there might be some misunderstanding and hurriedly covered it up. Come, let me introduce the two of you. The two of you have known each other for a long time, but you're both working for different masters. It's not for personal gain, it's for official business, so it's understandable. He pointed at Bluebeard. This is the head of the foreign elders of the Law Lineage Alliance. The Law Lineage Alliance is a three-legged alliance, but it's actually a four-legged alliance. Fellow Taoist Blue has a group of like-minded individual cultivator friends. With them, the Law Lineage Alliance's spies are everywhere. Planet Hassa's size is limited, and every Jin Dan is precious and conspicuous. If you don't form your gold core here, your aura will be like a firefly in the dark night. Fellow Taoists may not feel it, but we can see it with a single glance. Fellow Taoist Blue was appointed by me, but I didn't deliberately deceive you. Please forgive me. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. He wasn't that weak and couldn't take a blow. Wasn't it just an error of judgment? For a little Jin Dan like him who didn't have enough experience, it was normal. After all, people always had to grow. Compared with these 100 or even hundreds of years old Jin Dan, inexperience was nothing. Moreover, he didn't treat this person as a friend from the beginning to the end. It was his first time in Hassa, so he still had some precautions. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Blue, you cheated me so hard. I thought I could have a friend in Hassa. But since it's Immortal Elder's idea, those receiver crystals are also the treasures of the Law lineage? I'll ask for more when I go back, is that okay? Taoist Blue was in fear and trepidation. It's a sin to offend the master of the upper realm. But I don't have any bad intentions. I was just curious and knew that Immortal Elder didn't have any evil intentions, so I went to investigate. The power of the upper realm is not something we small worlds can offend. It's just that Hassa has been a bit unpredictable recently. In order to protect myself, I have to be careful. If I've been rude, please don't blame me. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled, and the matter between them was over. Since then, all his schemes after coming to Hassa had basically failed. He just didn't know when these Law lineage cultivators started to notice him. Did it start after he came to the Middle Realm, or did it start in Shizhao City? It was a lesson to never think that you're smart. If you don't have the strength to crush others, don't have the mentality of playing in the mortal world. Otherwise, you'll be a joke in the eyes of others. He still had a long way to go in the future. It was not too late to understand this now. He was very grateful to these cunning guys. They were also good teachers and helpful friends on his path of cultivation. The key was not to be deceived. The important thing was that he could learn something from it. Without Su Anyuan's powerful support, he was just a little Jean Dan with stupid strength. Who would recognize a fish jumping into a sword? Chapter 536. These were all trivial matters. The real issue was, what should they do about the swordsman who was guarding the crystal mine alone? Should they ignore him? Or should they send someone to deal with him? Who should they send? Everyone looked at Lu Xiaoyi. It was obvious that none of the local cultivators were willing to do this. Spying on a swordsman from the upper realm would only bring hatred to himself and his sect. There was only one person who was most suitable. Could this be a trap? Did the sword vein dig it for him? Or did the Dharma vein dig it out? However, if he did not step in, he would never know the real reason behind the chaos on planet Hassa. I'll go! But where's the crystal mine? Which fellow Taoist can lead the way? The tumbler, Yugong, and Zhu Feng were still hesitating, but Blue Beard took the initiative to step forward. I've offended you first, Master, so I need a chance to make up for it. I'm quite familiar with the crystal mine. I often trade some private goods with my friends. Why don't I lead you there to make up for my previous regret? The three of them clapped their hands and laughed, nodding. Lu Xiaoyi was also very carefree. Since Blue Beard was so open-minded, how could he be stingy? Hence, the two of them left the group and changed their direction slightly. Blue Beard praised. Master's escape technique is truly a supreme technique from the upper realm. His body is free and unrestrained, and he moves freely. Looking at it from the front, and looking at it from the back, it's fascinating. This Beard's knowledge is limited, but when I examine his breath, could it be related to the stars in the universe? Lu Xiaoyi was still very humble. Just call me by my name. Don't call me Master, Master. I was just born in a good place. Compared to your hardships here, we so-called masters are ashamed. Brother Blue Beard, what's so special about the mine on Jianji Mountain? Why is it worthy of being guarded? The cave is narrow. It's hard for people of our level to use our skills, especially for a swordsman. Isn't it suicide? Blue Beard explained. The geological conditions of the whirling star are quite special. It is clay, so it is easy to dig holes. The Na crystals are hidden in it, so the holes are deep and wide. It doesn't affect the cultivators fighting in it. The mines of Jianji Mountain were of the highest quality. They were usually heavily guarded, with Jean Dan on duty and formations set up. It was very difficult to sneak in. I'm guessing that this person is guarding the mine because he's afraid that someone will deliberately destroy it. This receiver crystal has its secrets too. Lu Xiaoyi did not pretend to be knowledgeable. Secret? Tell me about it. Blue Beard was very modest. Actually, it might not be a secret. It's just that recently, everyone has been spreading a rumor. It was said that the reason why Hasa planet was rich in kaleidoscopes, which could effectively transmit spiritual power, was that there was some kind of magical spiritual object in the depths of the crypt. Otherwise, how could there be such a mineral? As for what exactly it was, everyone had different opinions. And so on and so forth. It's probably something like spiritual marrow, strange beasts, rock cores, and so on. Anyway, it's something with spiritual power. It's precisely because of such an existence that minerals like receiver crystals are produced. In fact, it's the result of the long-term influence of spiritual power of the spiritual object. It intersects with a kind of very ordinary crystal, and the result is receiver crystals. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously. You mean, if someone can capture this kind of spiritual object for their own use, they can achieve the purpose of destroying the formation of receiver crystals? Bluebeard waved his hand. Master, I'm not taking the blame for this. This is not what I said, but what everyone said. If you ask me what I think, I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. How can I easily participate in this kind of thing? I'm just a small individual cultivator. I can't even lose my life in it. Who can I find to reason with? Things were getting more and more interesting. After coming to Hasa planet for 2 years, it was no longer peaceful, even if there was a faint murderous intention behind it. Lu Xiaoyi changed the topic. Brother Bluebeard, since you already know my identity, are you interested in leaving Hasa planet and going to the upper realm to broaden your horizons? I think the reason why you're leading the way for me is because you have other ideas, right? Bluebeard heard his straightforwardness and replied quickly. To tell you the truth, I really have this idea. But since the Master has already decided on the 3 of us, how can it be my turn? The old immortal said that the Dharma lineage alliance is a 4-way alliance, which is flattering me in front of outsiders. I do have some individual cultivator friends, but you also know that the reason why individual cultivators are individual cultivators is because they are not restrained. Usually, they can call their friends to buy and sell things, but when it comes to desperate times, people like us who are not bound by orthodoxy, who would be willing to fight to the death. It's already good enough to have a few people to wave the flag and shout for you. The Dharma Lineage Alliance only has 3 legs. I'm just a manager who runs errands and does odd jobs. I'm just earning some commission and getting some information. Of course, if there's a chance, I will fight for it. This is the reason why I came to the mine with the Master. In terms of strength, I may not be able to help much, but I can always do some side business. If the Master is satisfied, I also hope to have such an opportunity. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I won't make empty promises. It depends on the opportunity. On Hasa planet, I'm deaf and blind. If there's any trouble, as long as you can remind me in advance, everything is possible. The 2 hurriedly reached an agreement during the flight. A few days later, they began to approach Jianji Mountain. Bluebeard was indeed familiar with the terrain. In order to get a chance to go to the upper realm, he worked very hard. He chose a path that was rarely visited by people and approached without being discovered. Of course, this was also the reason why the swordsman Jean Dan came out empty-handed. How could the remaining Foundation establishment cultivators notice their whereabouts? Jianji Mountain was not a very majestic mountain. In fact, if one only looked at the layout, this place was actually not suitable to be the location of a Taoist orthodoxy. However, since it was built on the basis of a receiver crystal mine, other things did not matter. At the foot of Jianji Mountain, there was a huge cave. The entrance of the cave was more than 1,000 feet wide. It was obvious that this cave was dug by manpower. There were a few miners going in and out of it. Most of them were mortals, but there were also Foundation establishment cultivators patrolling back and forth. Bluebeard lowered his voice. It's here! There's a formation at the entrance of the cave. If the information is correct, other than the swordsman from the upper realm, there shouldn't be any other Jean Dan cultivators guarding the cave. Lu Shi narrowed his eyes and sighed in his heart. He was traumatized by caves. This was because senior brother Guang Bei had died in such an environment. Should he stay outside and wait for the rabbit to come out, quietly observe everything that happened, and then settle the matter peacefully? Or should he put himself in danger and take the initiative to seek answers? If it was in the past, he would never enter. But now, he had to enter. Not to mention anything else, just for the swordsman's heart in his heart. If he could not escape, where else could he escape to? It was easy to escape from the real world, but there was nowhere to escape from the cage in his heart. Who could guarantee that all the battles in a cultivator's life would be in an environment that he was best at? If he escaped this time, what about the next time? There would always be one that he could not avoid. When that time came, he was afraid that this fearless spirit would be gone. What was the point of practicing the sword then? He did not want to delay any longer. It was time to end it. Chapter 537. How do we get in? Bluebeard asked. Lu Xiaoyi replied straightforwardly. Just barge in. Is there a need to be so sneaky here? It'll be a joke. Instead of burdening yourself with psychological pressure, it's better to do it openly and let the other party worry. Brother, are you going in with me or are you going back? Bluebeard smiled awkwardly. I think I'd better not go in. But I'm not going back either. I'll wait at the entrance. Lu Xiaoyi laughed it off. The biggest taboo for local cultivators, especially rogue cultivators, was to offend forces, especially the mysterious forces from the upper realm, so it was understandable. Without another word, he slammed his body into the formation at the entrance of the cave. He had already passed through the formation, leaving behind a ringing alarm, a flickering light, and a restless and disorderly spiritual aura. It felt as if the earth was quaking and the mountains were shaking. This collision was not a collision of confidence, but an opportunity to break through the mental barrier. Inside the cave was an incomparably huge space. It was 1,000 feet in length and width, and several hundred feet in height. It was barely enough for cultivators to move around. The frightened mortals and cultivators rushed out of the dozens of tunnels connected by the space. Although they didn't know what had happened, in such an environment, the only thing they could do was to run out of the cave and escape if there was a slight tremor. Lu Xiaoyi did not care about the fleeing crowd. He only hovered in the air, waiting for them to leave. The reason why he used such an earth-shattering method to enter the cave was mainly for the sake of these mortals and low-level cultivators. He could not guarantee that there would not be a battle in the tunnel. Once a battle started in such a terrain, it would definitely bring about many innocent casualties. This was not what he wanted, so the purpose of this collision was to scare the crowd away. After waiting for an hour, he felt that there were no signs of life in the depths of the tunnels. This was also the principle of mortals working for cultivators. If there was a problem, it was right to run. No one would blame you, including the low-level cultivators. Only fools would hide and scheme. In a battle between high-level cultivators, it was very common to involve the innocent. If one was not smart enough, he could not blame anyone. Lu Xiaoyi was not worried that his actions would wake anyone up. In this situation, it was not a race against time. If the opponent really had a plan, it would not be less than an hour. Instead, he hoped that the other party would come out to greet him. Unfortunately, this Li Gui was clearly not a swordsman. Because the tunnel was very wide, it was much easier and faster than the cave of the North Gazing clan in the Wolf Ridge. His divine sense was also less affected by the refraction. In addition, he now had Jing Dan's divine sense. Lu Xiaoyi quickly figured out which tunnel was the main tunnel and which was the main tunnel. After all, this place was dug for mining, not for trapping people. Most importantly, he had the map of the mine. It was from 100 years ago, so it shouldn't be too bad. Following the main tunnel, Lu Xiaoyi slowly moved forward. Breaking the mental barrier was one thing, but being cautious was another. His divine sense swept deeply into the wall. Occasionally, he would even use his flying sword to cut and stab. This was to prevent any hidden traps or formations along the way. This was a low-level cultivation world. Formations were not that strong. Even if there was the existence of a cloud-top swordsman, with their level, they would not be able to set up a Yuanying level formation that would cause people to be helpless. As he moved forward, the tunnel did not become narrower. Instead, it became wider. This was the advantage of clay. It was easy to dig and there was no need to worry about collapsing. The main tunnel went all the way down. It was in the shape of a slanted staircase. It was not steep. This was dug for the convenience of mortals. It was not like the cave in the North Gazing clan. Mortals could not go down without a rope. Along the way, there were countless tunnels extending to both sides. They were all relatively short and shallow. Once his divine sense swept through, he would know. Other than a few mortals who were scared silly hiding and trembling inside, there was nothing worth looking at. After chasing them away, Lu Xiaoyi slowly began to descend. During this process, the interception of luck in his sea of consciousness began to change. If there was a change in interception of luck, it would definitely mean that something inexplicable would happen. It was not clear whether it was good or bad. But to him, he was facing a choice. Should he follow the warning of luck or follow his own challenge to himself? Would he become a person who was controlled by luck from now on? Would he advance if his luck was smooth and retreat if his luck was dark? How could everything be smooth in one's life? If he retreated at the slightest danger and setback, that was not cultivation. Cultivation, in essence, was a process that defied the heavens. But ever since he had this luck, he often acted according to luck. Was this progress? Or was it regress? What if one day, what he wanted to do conflicted with what his luck allowed? Would he not do it? Would he cower? Would he convert to the will of the heavens and become a docile citizen? He did not want to become such a person. He wanted to be himself. He would do what he had to do and what he wanted to do. Who cared about luck? When he was eating qi and building his foundation, he did not have enough power. But now, while he had a certain amount of power, he also hoped that he had a swordsman's heart that was worthy of this power. Therefore, even if this adventure was somewhat pointless, and it was a cave that swordsman was very wary of, and there was a change in interception of luck, he still wanted to challenge it, and be presumptuous for once. He should not become a mysterious slave, even if it was luck that made everyone in the cultivation world pale at the mention of it. He continued to descend, either fast nor slow. He wanted to give the few mortals who were hiding enough time to get out. In the fifth ring, in his first cultivation lesson, the relationship between cultivators and mortals was the most important thing. Now, it had become an instinct. Finally, in the image of his divine sense, there was a space in front of him that was even larger than when he first entered the mine. This was not marked on the map, so it could be imagined that this was the progress of the excavation in the past 100 years. More importantly, he could faintly feel the aura of cultivators there. The unexpected occurrence, Xianyuan Jin Dan's death, was very likely related to this new space. At the same time, the preparations he had made in the past 2 years were somewhat laughable. What if he had simply revealed his identity to the Sword Vein? His so-called investigation was somewhat laughable. But before the truth came to light, he could not say whether his previous preparations were meaningful or not. Thinking back carefully, he had carefully explored all the tunnels along the way. The entire mine maze was incomparably clear under the positioning of his stars. The sword was in the case, and the will was in the chest. Who cared about luck? As soon as he stepped into the space, he was shocked to find that this was not a man-made space, but a natural geocentric cave. The most amazing thing was that in the center of the cave, there was a blue stone bamboo shoot with a diameter of more than 100 feet. It was shining in the dark space. It was unknown how deep its roots were, but just a small part of it was enough to give rise to endless thoughts. He came early in the morning to rush to the market late at night. He thought that he was clever, but he had wasted 2 years of his time. It was also destined. Chapter 538 Beside the bamboo shoot, a Taoist sat cross-legged. When he saw Lu Xiaoyi's celestial teleportation, he frowned. Wushang shouldn't have sent people here. This doesn't conform to the original agreement. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Agreement? There's an agreement between Wushang and the three pure ones? The Taoist sighed. Lu Xiaoyi immediately knew that he had answered wrongly. He could pretend to be a Dharma cultivator in front of the Hassa natives, but he could never do so in front of the three pure ones. Enemies know you better than friends. This was not a joke. Dharma cultivators always had their own way of communicating. It could be intuition or a secret signal. There was no way to fake it. No matter how this Taoist tried to hide it, he could not get rid of the arrogance of the three pure ones. Both sides realized that they could not hide their identities, nor did they need to. Xianyuan and the three pure ones had been fighting for tens of thousands of years. Karma had long been integrated into their bones and blood. Although they did not speak ill of each other, they both knew that there could only be one person who could walk out of here alive. Biti was very polite. I am Biti, from the Three Pure Ones Yanning Courtyard. I am curious why Xianyuan delayed sending you here for more than 10 years. The receiver crystal is so important to your external sword. You shouldn't be so lazy. Or do you think that no one will dare to mess with the swordsman because the universe is peaceful? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. You're still interested in these questions? If I were you, the first thing I would think about is how to survive. What is this? Was it dug up recently? Biti spoke calmly as if he was talking to an old friend. I don't know the exact time. These natives are very cunning. But based on my judgment, it should have been before the death of the first swordsman after Xianyuan left with the mining raft. If you asked me, Xianyuan is strong, but he's not very smart. He has been mining receiver crystals for thousands of years, but when he found something, there was an immediate change. If it were the three pure ones, it would not have gone out of control. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. He asked humbly, What would you do? Billy said without hesitation, Give them a way out. Every 100 years, when the mining rafts arrive, a few people can be selected to take them to the fifth ring. This way, they will have a way to progress. They can deal with the abnormalities below by themselves. You don't have to worry about it. Lu Xiaoyi asked. The 5 rings aren't willing to accept people who already have their own ideals. Also, control is a problem, Biti said disdainfully. Who knows if they'll really be sent to the 5th ring? What if something happened midway? There were countless adaptations, so why would it become a problem? Fellow Taoist, you make Xianyuan sound like the Holy Church, but when it comes to killing people, which power can compare to your Xianyuan? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. That's different. He couldn't be bothered to argue. Swordsmen had always been disdainful of words when facing an enemy. Just kill. But the situation now was different. He needed to know more from this cloud-top swordsman. He was already disappointed with the natives. The useful information he obtained was not as useful as the 3 pure ones. Therefore, he didn't mind waiting a little longer. Did you kill the 2 cultivators stationed in Xianyuan? Billy shook his head and said sincerely, I only killed the second one. As for who killed the first one, that's a mystery. Take a guess. Is it the Dharma vein? Or the sword vein that you all nurtured? Lu Xiaoyi was equally sincere. I'm guessing that someone in the sword vein is stirring up trouble. You're not sure if it's the entire sword vein? Or one of them? I made a mistake. I shouldn't have investigated the Dharma vein. If I had come here first, would it have been better? At least you wouldn't have been able to enter the mines so easily. Billy was very satisfied with his honesty. Although they were on opposite sides, they were opponents who respected each other. You didn't make a big mistake. Maybe we're more scheming in the 5th ring, so we're always thinking from an abnormal angle. When I first came to Hassa, I also thought that the sword vein was stirring up trouble, just like you. But our way of dealing with it was the opposite. You went to the Dharma vein to verify it, while I came to the sword vein to verify it directly. We can't talk about who's better and who's worse. These natives are more cunning than you think. This has nothing to do with the level of the realm's cultivators. He smiled. You came to the sword vein first, so it won't affect anything. Although I've just pretended to be an emissary from Xianyuan, I've been to this place more than once. Do you think that the three pure ones won't be able to deal with a lower realm's array with our attainments in array formations? Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. I forgot about that. Of course, you can't be as brute as me. You probably know that I'm from Xianyuan from the way I entered the array, right? You've been here for so many years. Aren't you worried that you'll be targeted by the heavenly tribulation if your realm increases? BT smiled. The three pure ones have their own methods. I can't tell you about this, so please forgive me. You see, I've answered almost all of your questions, but you haven't answered mine. This doesn't seem to be in line with the Xianyuan swordsman's honesty. I really want to know why you're so late by 10 years. All of my plans were made to guard against you, but the result is that I'm afraid of you. After waiting for 10 years, I want to know the result. Isn't that too much? Lu Xiaoyi was very sympathetic. No, I'm late. I apologize. As for the reason, it's not complicated. The two guards died, and it's a matter of receiving crystals. Of course, Qinxiu Peak attached great importance to it. It's also because of this that they decided to send Jin Dan, who can solve the problem. You know, the outer swordsman doesn't like to ask for inner swordsmen. Coincidentally, I've reached the core formation stage, so they waited for me for 10 years. They let me consolidate a little and set off immediately. The conversation between the two was more intimate than that of best friends. They didn't hide anything. They both knew that even if the other knew, what could they do? They couldn't get out alive, so they could only take the secret to the netherworld. Especially Taoist BD, who had been on Hasa Star for nearly 90 years, was annoyed by these natives. He missed the time when he was entangled with Xianyuan. Hasa Star only allows early core formation stage cultivators to come here. The sooner, the better. This is common sense, but I don't understand. In Xianyuan, there are tens of thousands of outer swordsmen Jin Dan under the Qianxiu Peak, and there are no less than 100 new Jin Dan cultivators. Why are they waiting for you alone? Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. I didn't want to boast, but since everyone wants to tell the truth, I can't hide it from you. When I was in the foundation building stage, I was Xuanyuan's senior fellow apprentice. Later, I went to the fish-leaping cliff to stab the sword. Thanks to everyone's mercy, I barely survived. So the elders thought that there was probably nothing that could stop me. Of course, I'm talking about fighting. Sometimes my brain is muddled. BD heaved a sigh of satisfaction. It was much better to fight a battle of wits and strength with his old rival. Both of them used the truth to stimulate the other to speak more truth and put pressure on the other. This was the life of a cultivator he wanted. Unfortunately, there was no time. Then, I still want to congratulate you. But the glory when I was in the foundation building stage doesn't represent the glory I have now. I didn't come here to achieve my goal by fighting. Our Dharma meridians are like this, you know. Chapter 539. P.S. Begging for votes at the beginning of the month. Double the period, 1 vote, 1 get 1 free. If you miss this opportunity, you won't get another one. Sloth has prepared the 7th watch for you tonight. End of story. He's bedridden. He's spending more than he's earning. He needs monthly votes to prolong his life. Lu Xiaoyi was also curious. You'll definitely encounter the real Xianyuan swordsman here. Have you ever considered your own safety? What's the point? Would the 3 pure ones dare to take away a receiver crystal from here? BD smiled as usual. Of course not. You're a sword maniac. If we cut off 1 lifeline of Xianyuan, you'll definitely cut off 2 lifelines of the 3 pure ones. So we can't use force. As for my safety, I'm not in any danger now. I can't suppress my realm anymore. I'm afraid that if I don't do it now, I won't have the chance in the future. That's why I took the risk and pretended to be Xuanyuan's emissary. That's why I could enter the mine on the Dafa side and complete my final arrangements. I've been waiting for you to come to tell you that the 3 pure ones are within the limits of the rules. We didn't cross the line. Lu Xiaoyi casually put on a hat. It's Xuanyuan's fortune to have opponents like the 3 pure ones. We'll improve together. Can I see what kind of trump card you've prepared? Is it this bamboo shoot rock? What's it connected to below? BD gladly accepted his opponent's praise. This was what he deserved. After decades of forbearance, he successfully formed his Aurus core, killed Xuanyuan's Jin Dan, figured out the general secret of the mine, and then coincidentally obtained the ability to deal with this secret. He deserved it. He shifted his body to the side. You can look down through the bamboo shoot rock. You'll know what I'm doing. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands and muttered. You Dharma cultivators are always like this. Why don't you just fight to the death when there's a conflict? Why do you have to make it so complicated? Walking to the side of the blue bamboo shoot, he wasn't worried that BD would do anything. This was confidence that came from the bottom of his heart. He focused his gaze on the bamboo shoot and felt a blue halo surrounding him. His divine sense seemed to have penetrated through an endless distance. It was so far away that he seemed to have seen the depths of the Earth's core. A big turtle was slowly climbing up. Lu Xiaoyi carefully observed the turtle for quite a while, then raised his head and asked, I seem to feel something mysterious. Is this your doing? Billy smiled warmly. It's not my doing. It's the big turtle's trick. Since you've seen it, you can only wait here for it to come up. You can't be more than 300 meters away from the bamboo shoots. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to tell you this taboo. Lu Xiaoyi's body flickered, but he stopped when he was only 500 feet away. Then he turned back. Hee, fellow Taoist, you really know how to joke. What taboos are there? Under my Xuanyuan's escape skill, nothing in the world can stop me. Billy laughed even more happily. Of course, it was the limit of 500 feet. The reason why he said 300 feet was that he didn't want this swordsman to have any special tricks. Now, it seemed that he couldn't escape just like him. He was telling the truth, but he didn't tell the whole story. The reason why the Hasa star produces receiver crystals is that there is an old turtle in the depths of the Earth's core. It's an extremely ancient existence. Its realm and ability are unknown, but it can influence all kinds of minerals around it to transform them into receiver crystals that can transmit spiritual power. This shows that the old turtle has something special about its spirit. In another environment, it can't escape from the treatment of human grand cultivators. However, on the Hasa star, grand cultivators can't enter because they are afraid of heaven's doom, so they can avoid the tribulation of man. Even the immortal of Xianyuan can't find it. Less than 100 years ago, the sword vein opened up this space and found this secret. However, it wasn't a secret, so it spread like wildfire. Treasures can move people's hearts. This is the truth of the cultivation world. Even Xianyuan can't suppress the greed of human beings. The first golden core cultivator, Xianyuan, had died after this discovery. Obviously, he wanted to send this news back to the dome of the fifth ring, but unfortunately, someone didn't want him to do so. After the second Jin Dan came, he got along very well with the indigenous people. He didn't care much and didn't even enter the mine. He only focused on his own cultivation. The indigenous people probably thought that he had deceived the emissary of Xianyuan, and they didn't want to offend the forces of the upper world, so they wanted to let him go. However, the indigenous people didn't know, but it doesn't mean that I don't know. He's just a fake core cultivator, so what future does he have? He pretended to cultivate just to cover up the fact that he already knew the truth, so I took action. Lu Xiaoyi praised. Fellow Taoist spy is really decisive and straightforward. However, I'm curious about one thing. How can cultivators like you and I, who are in the Jin Dan realm, break the seal of such a strange object? You're taking it for granted, aren't you? Bai Ti shook his head and pointed at him. You're purely thinking like a swordsman. You only consider the problem from the perspective of combat power. Yes, in terms of combat power, not to mention Jean Dan like us, even a perfected person would be helpless. It's an existence that only a supreme or a sun god supreme can contend with. However, from the perspective of Orthodox Taoism, combat and sealing are two different things. Just because I can't beat it doesn't mean that I can't release it. This is the limitation of your understanding of the sword vein. Lu Xiaoyi felt that it made sense, but there were still some problems. So you broke the seal and waited here for this thing to slowly crawl out? You did it now because you felt that your time was up, so you pretended to be a Xianyuan emissary to guard it alone? And after I saw it here, I could only stay here with you and wait for it to crawl out and treat us as its first meal after regaining its freedom? At the same time, it also destroyed the foundation of the receiver crystal. After hundreds or thousands of years, without the influence of the old turtle, no new ore will be produced, and Xuanyuan's flying sword will be impossible to refine. Bai Ti sighed. Basically, that's the case. But there's one thing. The refining of Xuanyuan's external sword can only be said to be troublesome. You have to look for a substitute everywhere, but I believe that with Xuanyuan's ability, you can always find one. If you can't find one, you can always rob it. In the end, it's just a problem, not a hopeless situation. How can I, a mere cultivator, push Xianyuan, such a great force, into a hopeless situation? Who would believe it? Lu Xiaoyi also sighed. Then what are you after? Bai Ti's eyes were blurred. My loyalty to my sect. My hatred of 3 generations of elders in my family who were killed by Xuanyuan's swordsmen. My whole family will be included in the meritorious family of the 3 pure ones and enjoy the best treatment for generations after I make a contribution. Do you think that's enough? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes, it's more than enough. But I still have a question. Before Bai Ti came to Hazhuo, even if the 3 pure ones were fully prepared, they couldn't have guessed that there was such a thing in Hazhuo's heart. They couldn't have prepared in advance. So, where did you learn this method of breaking the seal that is beyond your Jean Dan's ability? Don't tell me that you're so smart that you figured it out by yourself. If you have this ability, you do more harm to Xianyuan by staying in the upper realm of the 5th ring than by doing this kind of thing. Chapter 540. At this point, Turquoise Taoist couldn't hold himself back anymore. When a man is about to die, he always needs to talk more. Because when he goes to hell, no one will listen to his **t again. He has done so much, but he can't show it in front of others. This is a great torture, and there is no sense of accomplishment. But he doesn't want to tell the whole story. He wants this Xianyuan swordsman to be a half-confused ghost. This is the biggest punishment he can give to the swordsman, because he knows that he may not be able to defeat this man. However, the 3 pure ones have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and they are not just good at fighting. So he pretends to be mysterious. Poisonous turtles appear and disappear, but there must be herbs within 7 steps. This is the way of balance between heaven and earth. If there is a strange turtle on a star, it will eventually be free, even if there is no external influence. The appearance of the big turtle is natural, and it is only a matter of time. You Xianyuan are mining on this star, so you have to come early. If no one pays attention to this star, your appearance will be delayed indefinitely. This is also karma. Since karma is established, there must be a coincidence to help it. You are right. Before I came to Hazhuo, the 3 pure ones didn't prepare for this. It happened in a hurry, and I didn't have enough time to learn systematically. But it doesn't mean that I don't have my own opportunities in Hazhuo. The big turtle is bound to appear, and opportunities are unpredictable. If it's not me, it's others. Who can stop it? His words are mysterious. In fact, what he means is that he has an opportunity here. The loss of Xianyuan is the will of heaven. The reason is that Xianyuan destroyed the original ecological environment here. As for whether the opportunity is an object or a person, it is another thing. But according to Lu Xiaoyi's judgment, it is more likely that it is a person. Then, in a low-level world of cultivation like Hazhou, who has the ability to teach a disciple from the top Dharma branch with the longest history in the fifth ring? But Lu Xiaoyi knows that he can't ask anymore. He just looks at the slow turtle in the bamboo shoots. This thing is so slow. How long will it take to crawl? Turquoise Taoist explains patiently. You swordsmen are ignorant and incompetent. If he had the time, he should practice less swordsmanship and read more books. That way, he would be able to resolve his anger and become a true cultivator. What you saw was only the image of the turtle in the bamboo shoot stone, but not necessarily its real location and speed. I opened this passage 10 days ago, and now I've already traveled more than half the distance. I'm afraid we don't have much time left. If you have any last words, write them down. The two of them talked about life and death as if they were friends. They didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. They were both people who understood karma very well. The target of their hatred wasn't each other, but something that they couldn't get rid of. Will killing you affect my escape from the blue bamboo shoots? Lu Xiaoyi was still in his swordsman mode. Billy shrugged. You'll have to ask it. Not me. Speaking of which, when will you swordsmen stop thinking about solving problems through killing? Lu Xiaoyi said regretfully. It's hard to change. It's just like how you three pure ones can't change your habit of using schemes and tricks to achieve your goals. Billy didn't agree with him. That's wisdom. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Wisdom can make people feel superior for a long time, but martial arts can only achieve temporary gratification. I'm a burr, I can't see too far ahead, so I can only focus on the present. So I'm sorry, I can't be sure when I'll attack you to vent my frustrations. You have to know, being killed by that old turtle is different from being killed by my sword. Billy nodded. I'm also a swordsman, I can understand. Do as you wish. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're no longer a swordsman. Do you know why the glory of the Cloud-Top Sword Palace is gone, and why even the Sword Vein doesn't want to acknowledge you? It's because you've learned too much about Dharma veins. You're no longer pure. You're just Dharma cultivators with flying swords. Billy was silent for a moment. I agree with you. The problem is, do we have a choice? The atmosphere became awkward. After a long while, Lu Xiaoyi seemed to react. Cutting off the conditions for the formation of the receiver crystal is a good idea. You've been preparing for this for many years. I'm new here, so it's hard for me to stop it. You could have ended all this years ago, but you chose to wait for me. This is... Taoist Billy nodded. Yes. I waited for you to come because I wanted you to take the blame for this on your head, Xianyuan. Not me, the imposter, but the real Xianyuan swordsman. Hatred needs a target, but my plan wasn't perfect. Because of the threat of the heavenly tribulation, I had already given up on waiting for Xianyuan to come. But you came at the worst time. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was a failure. I don't even know why I'm here. What an ingenious plan. But what will those native cultivators do? They can't keep fighting, they'll come back here eventually. Taoist Billy explained. Yes. They'll definitely come here, and soon. If you kill me, they'll see you here. If you don't, I'll explain to them where you and I come from. They're not stupid. The two of them stood by the bamboo shoot rock and watched the big turtle climb up. Although it was not fast, it never stopped. Lu Xiaoyi could not find a way to stop it from what he had learned. It was beyond his ability. Time passed slowly. Strangely, no one came in. This was very unusual. No matter who won, they shouldn't ignore this place, because this place was the foundation of the future of the Hasa star. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I admit that your plan is very thorough, but it seems that something unexpected has happened. Billy didn't hide his confusion. It shouldn't be. This is related to the foundation of their future communication with the fifth ring. They can't let outsiders like us do whatever we want here. 2 more days passed, and still no one came. They were all confined to the bamboo shoots, so they couldn't go out to inquire about the news. Lu Xiaoyi joked. You've been here for so many years. Haven't you trained any trusted subordinates? Billy said disdainfully. Being alone is the best protection. If I trained any trusted subordinates, I'm afraid they wouldn't be alive now. Lu Xiaoyi felt that this task was very awkward. He felt that he had strength but couldn't use it. He had been reflecting on what he had done wrong. He realized that his mistake was that he didn't take full advantage of his strength in fighting. He used the so-called rude swordsman's way to solve the problem. Instead, he believed in his own scheming ability. In fact, a cultivator's problem-solving ability was a comprehensive ability, strength, and wisdom. He was good at fighting, but he couldn't figure out his opponent's fighting heart. This was because he didn't understand his own strengths and weaknesses. Compared with the experience of those old Dan who had lived for hundreds of years, he was still too inexperienced, so he was restrained in every aspect. This was a lesson for him. He still had so many things to learn after he got out of the shelter of the sect. Billy exclaimed. How is this possible? Chapter 541. In Lu Xiaoyi's impression, Turquoise Taoist was a tough and forbearing Taoist. He was thoughtful and purposeful. After so many days of being together, Lu Xiaoyi had never seen Turquoise Taoist lose his composure. Although the two of them were at loggerheads with the ultimate goal of killing each other, they showed the demeanor of a cultivator in the process. Baihe wanted to enjoy the pleasure of his plan, while Lu Xiaoyi wanted to know as much as possible about the truth of the matter. Seeing Turquoise Taoist concentrating on the blue bamboo shoots, Jin Haodong said with a smile, Why are you panicking? Did the old turtle become a beauty? Come and see for yourself. Turquoise Taoist didn't even raise his head. Lu Xiaoyi saw that Turquoise Taoist didn't seem to be acting, so he also sent his spiritual mind to the blue bamboo shoots. He found something. Because of the material of the bamboo shoots, Jin Dan cultivators like them could only detect a limited distance. This was also the reason why he could distinguish the appearance of the old turtle, but he couldn't determine its rising speed and distance. But now, after the limitation of the spiritual mind and a certain limit, many things in the blue bamboo shoots became clear. It was no longer a vague big turtle. To be more precise, it was not a living creature, but an external form of a mass of energy. The old turtle was just an appearance. Below it, endless spiritual vigor was slowly rising, just like a reservoir under a flood. The water level was rising and reaching the warning line. Of course, there was no dam here, but the blue bamboo shoots had an end. When the spiritual vigor energy was forced out, it might mean that there would be amazing changes on the Hassa star. In this regard, Turquoise obviously knew more. The three pure ones had rich knowledge in this regard, so Turquoise Taoist could guess the truth as soon as he saw this situation. This is not a strange beast at the Earth's core. This is the essence of the spiritual vigor of the Hassa star. As long as they rush out, this place will at least become a medium cultivation star, and the spiritual vigor will make up for the rules of nature here. Here, there will be immortals and immortals. The potential of the Hassa star has been released by me. Lu Xiaoyi said directly. You have been fooled. Turquoise raised his head and said with self-mockery. Yes, I have been fooled by the Aborigines. They don't want to negotiate with you, Xianyuan. They just want to upgrade their own cultivation world. I was wondering why no one came here. You know that once we start, we can't stop. Lu Xiaoyi added. Also, they didn't fight at all. The sword vein was in cahoots. Their goal was to use us as the driving force behind the release of the spiritium. This way, they could avoid my, Xuanyuan's, investigation. Forgive me for being blunt, but I'm afraid they've already seen through your identity. Billy retorted. Aren't you the same? How daring of them! If a lower realm offends a higher realm, aren't they afraid of being purged? However, this does not conflict with my goal. Xianyuan is in trouble. Lu Xiaoyu was about to retort when he suddenly stopped and stared at the end of the main tunnel. All right, here comes the peach picker. Taoist Emerald Hoof also noticed the movement in the tunnel. In their line of sight, 1, 2, a dozen, dozens of whirling golden core cultivators appeared in their line of sight. Chen Jiang, Immortal Elder Yun, Yu Gong, Zhu Feng, and the other cultivators led by dozens of cultivators with firm expressions and resolute eyes, walked forward step by step. This was almost half of the Jingdan elites of planet Hassa. Today was a historical moment for planet Hassa. It was the greatest honor in their lives that they could be here, because what they did would benefit thousands of generations of planet Hassa. They puffed out their chests proudly and rejoiced for the upcoming upheaval. It meant that the whirling star would no longer be controlled by others. No matter where you came from, whether you were from the upper world or the middle world, malicious or kind, they would hold their own destiny tightly in their hands. They would no longer be ordered around by others. For this, they had prepared for nearly 100 years. For this purpose, the Sword Vein and the Dharma Vein resolutely abandoned the thousands of years of separation and grudges. They were tightly united and cooperated with each other for the sake of their own home planet. It was better to live in one's own home. How could it be more meaningful to be sent out of their home planet to the upper realm than to work hard in their own home planet? Thousands of years later, their names would be engraved in the history of planet Hassa, and they would become the great pioneers of planet Hassa again. This was human beings. They would never bow and bend their knees. If they bent their backs for a moment, it must be for a moment to straighten their backs in the future. In front of them, the two elite disciples from the upper realm's fifth ring had become the antagonist, the clown. I'm being despised, Turquoise murmured. Although he had achieved his goal, the process made him very uncomfortable. What the three pure ones wanted to do, they wanted to do it themselves, not be played in the palm of others' hands. Am I not on the side of justice? Where did this come from? Lu Xiaoyu realized that he was very embarrassed. He tried his best to integrate into this world, learn the language, familiarize himself with the geography, open a shop, and listen to others. Was it all to watch children play in the mud under the gaze of others? The cultivators of planet Hassa came to the space, but they did not approach. Instead, they stood a few hundred feet away from the blue bamboo shoots. Obviously, they had their own understanding of the magic of the blue bamboo shoots. All of this was actually premeditated. If they were far away, they would not have to worry about someone doing something desperate. Why bother? Anyway, in the upsurge of spiritual vigor, all the cultivators trapped in the light circle of the blue bamboo shoots would be decomposed and evaporated into spiritual vigor particles to feed back to this world. They did not want to be stained with the blood of the upper realm cultivators. Turquoise was very unhappy. Now that you are here, waiting for the upsurge of spiritual vigor, have you not thought about the future? Do you know which orthodoxy in the upper realm you have offended? Seeing that everyone was silent, Turquoise began his performance. For the first time in his life, he began to praise the three pure ones' sworn enemy. They are the Xianyuan sword sect. It is the most bloodthirsty, ruthless, and barbaric orthodoxy known in the universe. Their cultivation is not for longevity, but for conquest, killing, destruction, madness, and unscrupulous. Taoist Jufeng, who was among the Hassa cultivators, chuckled. But you are not a Xianyuan swordsman. Am I wrong? You are also an enemy of Xianyuan. If you can do it, why can't we? Besides, we did not do all of this. It was the result of your upper realm's coaxing. We were just passively waiting. Cause and effect belong to the upper realm. As for the result, we Hassa people will kindly accept it. Turquoise's usual demeanor was now gone. He also wondered what was wrong with his current state of mind. He had clearly done it in Dafa, but he was extremely uncomfortable with the process. He hated being looked down upon, hated being manipulated, and hated that his decades of hard work were like a farce. The reason he completed the task was only because of a little luck, not his own wisdom. This was unacceptable to him. He had dedicated his most precious youth to this place, but in the end, he discovered that if he was lucky, even if he left a dog here, he could still complete the task? Chapter 542. However, he couldn't refute anything. His so-called adventure and the way to crack the blue bamboo shoots were deliberately set up by the indigenous people and leaked to him. The impersonation of Xuanyuan's messenger went smoothly because of their close cooperation. Even when he secretly sneaked into the crystal mine for more than 10 years, he was also under their surveillance. The entire Hassa planet was putting on a show to cooperate with him, the clown. The Xianyuan swordsman had only been a fool for less than 2 years, but he had been a fool for decades. Lu Xu was still calm. Is this the will of the entire Hassa planet? Or is it part of it? Strangely enough, the whirling cultivators did not care about Baihe's harsh words, but they had a deep fear of this real Xianyuan emissary, who spoke softly and slowly. Immortal Being Cloud was very cautious. In the beginning, it was the idea of us leaders and also our arrangement. But now that the secret has been made public, it is the will of all the Hassa cultivators. We have the right to build our own hometown. We have the right to cultivate to the upper realm. We also have the right to decide the direction of our own astral resources. We have the right to decide whether to sell or not. To whom? At what price? We are equals, not some lower realm from the upper realm. All the Hassa cultivators puffed out their chests. Obviously, this was their inner voice. They didn't want to continue thousands of years of subservience and sacrifice. There were 2 reasons for their change. Firstly, it was the deep-rooted idea of pursuing independence. Secondly, in the past 100 years, there had been people who had explained to them what the so-called true upper realm was, the methods of the upper realm, the bottom line, and the rules and order of the universe. They understood how to achieve their own goals under the premise of avoiding the revenge of the upper realm. Taoist Baihoof's role in this was not as dispensable as he thought. In fact, if another cultivator tampered with the blue bamboo shoots, including Lu Xiaoyi, it would be impossible to do it as perfectly as he did. Because of the profound theoretical knowledge of the 3 Pure Ones cultivators, he played a decisive role in it. This was the trend of nature. When the trend was specific to human beings, it looked more like countless coincidences mixed together. It was accidental, but also inevitable. Senior Brother Yutan, who killed it? Immortal Being Cloud said firmly. It was our collective agreement. You don't have to ask about the specific person. If you really want to know, then just think that we worked together to do it. Because he refused to give Hassa Star a future. Refused to cooperate. He treats us like slaves, lowly people. Lu Xiaoyi did not comment and looked at Sword Master Qingjiang, who had been silent the whole time. What about you? Do you have anything to say? Xinjiang took a deep breath. Our sword vein art came from Xianyuan, this is an indisputable fact. But this doesn't mean that we, and our descendants, have to sell everything we have to Xianyuan. We have been selling for thousands of years. If the art had a price, the value of the receiver crystal would have been more than enough. If skills were priceless, then this universe would not be divided into so many realms, forces, and orthodoxies. Xianyuan could not use a single favor to exchange for everything of others. Not only this generation, but the next generation as well. None of their descendants could escape from this. Nothing can be exchanged for our freedom and our dreams. I killed Yutan. I have no grudge against him, but he blocked the path of all the cultivators of Hassa Star, so he deserved to die. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There was no need to ask any more. This was an unsolvable dispute because you could never think from the other party's point of view. This was also the common problem of almost all the thorny problems in the cultivation world. The mysterious blue bamboo shoot stone was found in the receiver crystal mine of the Sword Stance Mountain, so the wind blew and the clouds moved. Was it the sword vein that contacted the Dharma vein? Or was it the Dharma vein that actively approached the sword vein? These were no longer important. What was important was that they all had an upward heart and a belief to contribute to the mother planet. The power of the natives alone could not solve this problem. First, there were technical reasons. The ceiling was Jean Dan's realm. How could their knowledge be compared to the upper realm that had no ceiling? In the fifth ring, the major forces had not only real half-immortals, but also real immortals. Their vision and knowledge were not comparable to those of Hassa Star. Moreover, they had to consider how to face the wrath of Xianyuan from the upper realm after solving this problem by themselves. Therefore, they began to stir up trouble, starting from killing Yutan. They wanted to let the upper realm realize the changes here, and then wait for the opportunity to profit from the chaos. There was still a missing thread, a mysterious thread that would string everything together. However, Lu Xiaoyi already had his own judgment, so he did not waste his breath on these people. He turned around and walked to the blue bamboo shoot. Because the old turtle that was transformed by spiritual vigor was not far from the ground, the part of the blue bamboo shoot that was exposed to the ground had begun to change. It was colorful and dense. That was the strange appearance of the huge and pure five-element spiritual vigor through the blue bamboo shoot. At this time, even the most stupid cultivator understood what it meant. When the colorful flow reached the extreme, and the old turtle in the blue bamboo shoot jumped out of the bamboo shoot stone, it was the moment when the spiritual vigor of Hassa Star was reborn. Pointing at the old turtle on the blue bamboo shoot and the spiritual vigor that was becoming more and more obvious, Lu Xiaoyi looked at the crowd. There is a truth that you must understand. In this world of cultivation, except for time, everything else can be stopped. Just like the spiritual vigor here, since it can come up, it can also go down. As he spoke, the interception group in his mind turned and cut off the connection between the bamboo shoot stone and the outside world, cutting off a mysterious guidance. His voice was soft but unquestionable. Stop! Now is not the time for you to come up. He spoke to the big turtle in public. Everyone, including Beatty, thought that he was a fool. Was he driven crazy by anger? What was the big turtle? It was the essence of the spiritual vigor ocean that had been accumulated in the depths of Hassa Star for countless years. It was a psychic existence, something that would turn into the law of the great Tao when it jumped up to the ground. How could such an existence be controlled by the words of a mere Jean Dan? Too naive. Too ridiculous. But to everyone's astonishment, after Baiha unlocked the seal, the spiritual power that had been steadily increasing suddenly stopped. Although they could feel the irritation of the spiritual power and the reluctance of the big turtle, the spiritual power had indeed stopped. This was something that even a supreme cultivator might not be able to do. Beatty stammered. How did you do it? Lu Xiaoyi didn't pay any attention to him. Lu Xiaoyi talked to him before because he needed time to reach his goal and communicate with the turtle. Now, he wasn't interested in talking to him. He had killed Xuanyuan's people and wanted to hurt him. There was no room for negotiation. Chapter 543. Looking at everyone's surprise, Lu Xiaoyi remained calm. Maybe it's just an accident. The big turtle is tired. Maybe it wants to take a rest at this moment. Lu Xiaoyi lowered his head and faced the big turtle again. Go down 1,000 feet first. You make everyone very uneasy here. I thought you were going to have a big meal. This time, everyone saw clearly that the big turtle was unwilling to raise its neck to the sky. It was an illusory spiritual body, so it couldn't make a sound. However, what it spat out was an extremely strong storm of spiritual vigor. Although it didn't want to do that, what made people feel desperate was that the big turtle really lowered its butt. Under its suppression, the tremendous spirit vigor began to shrink. It actually shrank back to hundreds of meters before it stopped moving. Now everyone understood that this swordsman from Xianyuan could really control the spiritual vigor of the whirling star. In other words, as long as he was there, the whirling star would never change. Becoming a middle-upper cultivation world would always be a dream. It would only take a moment to go from heaven to hell. The unexpected stimulation made the cultivators of the whirling star begin to show murderous intent in their eyes. Lu Xi laughed. What? Are you not satisfied? Am I delaying your future? The cultivation world is like this. If you don't fight with your blood, you can't get anything you want. Since you want to fight, I'll give you a chance. I'll let you know what a Xianyuan swordsman is. With a leap, he moved thousands of feet away. At the same time, 7 flying swords spun out and formed a mysterious sword formation in the slightly narrow space, the Big Dipper sword formation. The 500 feet limit mentioned by Billy was meaningless to him. Since he showed his ability to affect the old turtle, people were no longer surprised. The space was instantly in chaos, like a tiger entering a flock of sheep. The 7 flying swords above Lu Xiaoyi's head balanced attack and defense. He held a long sword in his hand and killed everyone he saw. For a moment, blood splashed, and people shouted loudly. Those who could come here were all cultivators of the whirling star who didn't care about life and death. Since they had shown their faces in front of the cultivators of the upper realm, there was a possibility that the upper realm might retaliate against them in the future. However, they did not expect that the retaliation would come so quickly. Dozens of people against one, and all of them were at the Jindan realm. In the eyes of ordinary cultivators, there was no way to fight this battle. There was no reason to retreat. However, they had never really come into contact with the top swordsman from the upper realm. They did not know what it meant to be the craziest bandit on that bandit planet. For a moment, the flying swords and spells filled the narrow space. However, with Lu Xiaoyi's ghost-like escape art and the tight defense of the sword formation, they could not cause any harm to him at all. But the sharpness of the sword formation was something they didn't dare to imagine. With Lu Xiaoyi's heavy sword, his strength was outstanding even in the 5th ring. In this place, he could easily defeat anyone with a single slash. The first unlucky one was Bluebeard, who was hiding behind the crowd. Knowing that there was something strange about him, Lu Xiaoyi's first slash was especially heavy. The combined power of the sword formation directly pierced through Bluebeard. It also slightly injured the Jindan behind him. Swordsman was not suitable for such a narrow terrain. The problem was that it was even worse when dozens of Jindan were squeezed together. Once the spells were cast, they would not care about anything else in a moment of desperation, and accidental injuries were everywhere. Lu Xiaoyi's flying swords were very tricky. They specifically targeted those powerhouses who were clear-headed and coordinated. Under his heavy sword, the counterattacks of the whirling star cultivators seemed to be disorganized, and each of them acted on their own. It was inevitable that they would be injured and killed one by one. The difference between the upper realm and the lower realm was undoubtedly exposed in a real battle. Although they were all in the middle and late stages of Jindan in terms of cultivation, in terms of skills, system, and killing experience, how could they be a match for the strongest 5th ring elite of the sword sect? Just his unparalleled heavy sword alone was enough to render his opponents helpless. In the flying sword light, one of Qinjiang's arms was separated from his body. It was instantly smashed into pieces, and could not be put back. Immortal Elder Yun only had one leg left. Would he still be able to stand like before? The other powerhouses all had their own casualties, and none of them were whole. When the powerhouses were the first to be wiped out, how could the remaining weak ones react and want to run? In this special environment and situation, not only did the whirling Jindan's advantage in numbers not play a role, but it also became a burden. In a different environment, in the vast sky outside, he would not be able to do this. But here, when his sword formation enveloped everyone, nothing could be changed. Lu Xiaoyi was also injured all over. This was the result of his pursuit of a quick kill. If the battle dragged on for too long, it was inevitable that some of them would escape. This was not something he wanted to see. Lu Xiaoyi's speed was faster, his flying sword was heavier, his idea was more advanced, and he was risking his life more. In such a collision, the result was predictable. In just a short moment, Lu Xiaoyi had made full use of the characteristics of sword cultivators. He was not afraid of fighting in groups. At the same time, he also found the secret door left by the Sword Mountain when it was passed down in the Whirling Star. These swordsmen did not specialize in close combat. They might have practiced it, but it was just a hobby and had not been sublimated into the system. They did not understand the true meaning of close combat for swordsmen. If it was a fifth ring or other sword vein experts, they only needed to send a few people to engage him in close combat, and his combat power would be greatly reduced. He did not show mercy to these cultivators of planet whirling, nor did he kill them indiscriminately. Those who knew their limits would be severely injured. Those who wanted to risk their lives, he directly sent them to the Western Paradise without any hesitation. Since Roly-Poly dared to say that the responsibility of killing would be borne by everyone, they had to accept this result. In the cultivation world, was it so easy to boast? 2 years of grievances were resolved in one day. Since they could not win in strategy, they could only compete with their fists. How could they upgrade the world without paying the price of blood? He no longer had the mentality of a rice worm. He had become a real swordsman. As a swordsman, he had to stand in the swordsman's perspective and look at the problem. He should not be weak and sympathize with others. Otherwise, he would not know his own position, and the unlucky one would be himself in the end. Supreme Fufeng was right. He should just take care of himself, and not care about other things. Xinjiang fell to the ground. His heart was dead. Together with him, there were dozens of heavily injured cultivators of planet whirling who had become fish on the chopping block. He did not understand. How could a perfect plan that was about to succeed fail? However, he finally understood what a swordsman was. Without a doubt, Xian Yuan from the upper realm had never really sent out their elite disciples, which gave him the illusion that a swordsman from the upper realm was only SOSO. That was why he thought that with the protection of the heavenly tribulation, the upper realm might not be able to do anything to them. It was all wrong. If the sword vein from the upper realm got serious, they would be completely wiped out. Who could they blame? Lu Shi was bathed in blood. He picked out a half-dead person from the crowd. It was Blue Beard. He threw him on the ground and pointed at the despairing whirling cultivators. Today, I'll set a rule for all of you. If you have any requests, say it. Even if you don't agree at that time, the news will definitely be sent back to Xianyuan for the sect to decide. You have to let everyone live. However, the way you kill people will only bring disaster to you. There's nothing wrong with restoring the realm's spiritual opportunity. However, if Xianyuan doesn't give you something that belongs to Xianyuan, you can't take it. Chapter 544. Lu Xiaoyi turns around and stares at the unnatural Baihoof. What do you think about what happened between us? Baihoof looks up to the sky and laughs. What an ignorant man! No matter how domineering Xianyuan is, when have you ever seen the 3 pure ones bow to you? It's just a battle to the death. It's not worth mentioning. Lu Xiaoyi can't help sneering at his bold words. Battle? You think too highly of yourself. He suddenly puts his hand on the hilt of his sword and shouts. Baihoof on the opposite side is nervous. Who can be calm when facing such a fierce man? He is just pretending to be arrogant to calm down. Lu Xiaoyi's posture makes him instinctively respond to Baihoof's aura instinctively. His own aura also reaches the peak in an instant. This is the instinct of a cultivator, but he forgets. There is a loud explosion above, and thunder falls. Under the punishment of heaven, Baihoof Taoist is burned into charcoal. His face is full of unwillingness, like a statue. Cultivators of the planet Hassa are scared out of their wits. This man treats human life as nothing. If all the people of Xianyuan are such swordsmen, what is the future of the planet Hassa? Lu Xiaoyi grabs Blue Beard with one hand and shouts in a low voice. Beard! You and I know each other. I can spare your life if you tell me the truth. I won't ask you too many secrets. What is your bounded domain? Blue Beard raises his head with difficulty. Blue Beard, a casual cultivator, a native of the planet Hassa. Lu Xiaoyi feels the strange movement in his mind, but he doesn't expect that such a person is a man of sacrifice. He can't get anything out of him. He exerts force on his hand and shatters Bluebeard's heart meridian. At the same time, the intercepted luck in his mind turns and absorbs Bluebeard's luck. This luck is combined with the intercepted luck in his mind. It is very strange. Lu Shi finds that there seems to be an old man with a white beard smiling at him, an AI. It is a familiar smile. When he was forming essence, he had a premonition that he was involved in some extraordinary circle, but he didn't have time to think about these changes. There were too many things left for him to deal with. The first thing Lu Shi had to consider was how to clean up the mess here. He had already fought and killed them. He couldn't just leave them here like this. The cultivators of planet Hassa would stay away from him, but they would never be willing to submit to him and be his subordinate. Humans had never been a race that would be oppressed by others. As soon as he arrived at the blue bamboo shoots, he roughly guessed what it was. In the tunnel, his cloud-severing orb had sensed something, but at that time, he could not understand why. Once he came into contact with the blue bamboo shoots, he finally understood. Back then, when he was a lonely soul drifting in the universe, he encountered the great collapse of the fragments of fate, and the places where they fell were not limited to living beings. It also included nature. For example, the huge spiritual vigor stored deep in the Earth's core of planet Hassa fell a very strong fragment of luck. After tens of thousands of years of fusion, it merged with the spiritual vigor and formed the illusionary form of the old turtle. It had the most superficial self-awareness and the consciousness of the great Tao, so it began to get rid of the confinement in the Earth's core and take the initiative to spread to the human world. If it was just this self-awareness, it would take at least hundreds of thousands of years or even longer to form a path to pursue self-awareness. However, if someone was leading the way, this process would be greatly accelerated. The person leading the way was the mysterious Bluebeard. Bluebeard also had luck. In the beginning, Lu Xiaoyi did not notice it. In fact, as his cultivation level increased, he realized that the cultivators with strong providence he met now would always have a way to conceal themselves. They all had their own tricks, just like his sword's spirit's concealment. But what made Bluebeard different was that he seemed to belong to a certain force or an organization in a certain world. He acted with a plan and a purpose, unlike Lu Xiaoyi who acted purely on instinct. He must have a purpose. Although Lu Xiaoyi couldn't be sure what his purpose was. This person came from the same place as the person he had never met before who had seized his destiny when he was forming his gold core. Because of these two seizing of destiny, he had faintly seen an old man's smiling face in the unseen world, and that smile had made his hair stand on end. He killed Bluebeard decisively. First, he was not interested in spiritual spying. Second, he really didn't want to get involved in a cosmic conspiracy at the level of the star area. His small shoulders were too small to bear such a big pressure. What was certain was that these two people both came from a force that could use the luck in the sea of consciousness of cultivators to some extent. It was hard to say how much they used it, but it shouldn't be too strong. Because he, a worm in the universe, had ruined their plans twice, which made his heart beat fast. He had no choice. If he didn't do this, he couldn't solve the current problem. What was Bluebeard's purpose? Was it purely to make trouble for the Fifth Ring sect or Xianyuan? Or was it really for the recovery of the spiritual vigor on planet Hassa to benefit mankind? Or was it not for the spiritual vigor, but to take away the luck that belonged to nature? He didn't know. But the problem he was facing now couldn't be avoided. The cultivators on planet Hassa were temporarily disabled, the threat from the three pure ones was removed, and the mysterious Bluebeard was dead. So, how should he deal with this luck? Including the huge amount of spiritual vigor under the command of the luck? Normally, from Xuanyuan's perspective, from the perspective of the outer sword of Qianxiu Peak, he should suppress this majestic spiritual vigor. He had this ability because he could affect the old turtle, who was the incarnation of luck. He learned this ability secretly from Blue Beard. Because Blue Beard had been communicating with the old turtle in some mysterious way, Lu Xiao was just hiding on the side and secretly learning from him. While doing so, he also took advantage of his interception luck. His ability to intercept luck was far stronger than Blue Beard's. He couldn't remember how many people's luck he had taken away. However, it could also be said that Blue Beard's method of using luck was rather crude and far from reaching the level of subtlety. The premise of its use was that for the vast majority of cultivators, the mysteries of luck were unknown. This was a benefit that belonged to a certain group of people. He didn't quarrel with Beatty for a few days because he had nothing to do. He just met Beatty's long-suppressed desire to express himself to achieve the purpose of completely controlling the big turtle's consciousness. Now, the overall situation outside was temporarily settled. How should he deal with the spiritual vigor and the old turtle? For Xianyuan, for stability, for continuous resources of receiver crystals, he should suppress the big turtle and the spiritual vigor. Only by maintaining the status quo could he protect the interests of Xianyuan to the greatest extent. This was for the public. If it was for personal reasons, he should swallow this ownerless luck. He had a hunch that in the future, he would inevitably have to deal with the force behind Blue Beard. The only way he could think of to protect himself was not swordsmanship, but the powerful interception team. Was there a third way? Chapter 545. He chose the third option. The cultivators of planet Hassa looked at the swordsman in despair. With him around, no one in the entire star sector could stop him. The point was, if they missed this opportunity, they did not know when the next one would be. They didn't understand Beatty's technique, they didn't know Blue Beard's role in it. For a spiritual vigor creature like this, after failing once, they didn't know how long it would stay dormant. Even thousands of years were considered short. They wouldn't be as close to success as they were this time. Moreover, as long as the Xianyuan cultivators were around, they would never have the chance to make a move. This time, they could still plot secretly. Now that the secret was out in the open, this place would definitely be heavily guarded by the upper realm. This was the cruelty of the cultivation world. What could they do if they were not as good as others? The swordsman from the upper realm was right about one thing. How could change, especially a drastic change, not pay the price of blood? If they had realized this earlier, they would have surrounded and suppressed him openly in the open space outside and fully utilized their advantage in numbers. Even though they might not have won, they would not have fallen to this state where they did not even have the qualifications to negotiate. How could there be such a logic in the cultivation world to always think of peaceful changes? This was a competition between a rising force and a vested interest. There was no room for coexistence or compromise. One wrong step would lead to many wrong steps. They would lose the future of planet Hassa. They watched as the swordsman dealt with his opponent from the upper realm and inexplicably killed the most famous rogue cultivator, Blue Beard. He stood next to the blue bamboo shoots with a cold face, controlling life and death, taking as he pleased. When the door was opened and they really came into contact with the outside world, they finally understood what the swordsman was. A swordsman was lying on the ground. He could not get up, but it did not stop him from screaming from the bottom of his heart. No! No! A flash of sword light flashed past like lightning, once again cruelly nailing him to the ground, making his already heavy injuries even worse. However, this still could not stop the other cultivators from shouting. Unsurprisingly, every cultivator who shouted was given an extra flying sword until no one dared to make a sound. They finally understood what kind of existence this so-called swordsman orthodoxy in the upper realm was. They were cold, cruel, bloodthirsty, and had no sympathy at all. They could only watch him give the order to the big turtle and wait for the spiritual opportunity to leave. Waiting for hope to be extinguished, this was the darkest moment of a star. But what happened next made them unable to believe their eyes. Originally, the spiritium that had already fallen 1,000 feet didn't continue to fall. Instead, it began to slowly rise. What followed was the cold voice of the swordsman. Xian Yuan, in the tens of thousands of years since the establishment of the sect, the biggest rule is to follow the rules. Restoring the spiritual vigor of the celestial bodies, benefiting mankind for generations to come, and leading the prosperity of the cultivation world has always been Xuanyuan's unchanging principle. If Bidi was still here, he would definitely scold him for being a hypocrite and spouting nonsense. But now, no one could stop him from flaunting himself. Prospering the whirling cultivation ecosystem, this wish is not wrong. But your mistake is to use improper methods. Things that could have been negotiated, yet he wanted to achieve his goal by killing people? Xuanyuan's blood is not so easy to be stained with. We accept any constructive opinions and are willing to develop together under the premise of friendly cooperation. But Xian Yuan does not accept threats. He does not accept threats. He does not accept conspiracies and tricks. Remember this, it will be beneficial for the survival of the whirling planet. This is the first time, and I don't want to see it a second time. Xuanyuan's forgiveness is only one time. Cherish it. In just a few moments, the cultivators of the whirling planet experienced the torture of ice and fire. No one knew what everyone was thinking, but the memory of today would accompany them for the rest of their lives and would never be forgotten. Using killing to establish their prestige, using righteousness to establish their virtue, at this moment, everyone, including Xinjiang immortal Wingyu Gongju Feng, had to lower their proud heads. If the cultivators of other orthodoxies chose to do this, they would definitely establish their virtue first, and then convert everyone. They wouldn't need to be stained with blood. But Xuanyuan's people were the opposite. They could have raised the spiritual opportunity first and gained the gratitude and support of the cultivators of the whirling planet, but they chose to kill without telling anyone. Was this the swordsman? Not exactly. Because Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about the bad habits of human beings. They were afraid of the strong and cruel, and they were ungrateful. After Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be the turtle, he focused on the big turtle. After stealing Bluebeard's fortune and fusing with it, he had a rough idea of Bluebeard's ultimate goal. Maybe he wanted to mess things up, but his main goal was still the fortune in the sea of consciousness, which was much stronger than the fortune in the sea of consciousness of human beings. This was what Bluebeard and the force behind him really wanted to steal. They almost succeeded, but they met Lu Xiaoyi. Or it could be said that now, Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of it. Once the mass of fate in the shape of the big turtle merged with the sky, it would form the principle of Tao, which belonged to the whirling planet, and could no longer be obtained. Not only the fate, but also the Tao realm about the five elements, yin, yang, chaos, and so on, which had been formed by the spiritual opportunity of the Earth's core for hundreds of thousands of years. It was now a real treasure, an incomparably precious treasure for any cultivator. The point was that the big turtle transformed from the precious Tao realm didn't reject him. It even seemed to take the initiative to join him. He had to admit that the force behind Bluebeard was really amazing. There were countless cultivation realms and orthodoxies, each with their own specialties and characteristics. Obviously, in terms of fate, the orthodoxies behind Bluebeard were stronger than the fifth ring cultivators. Should he get it? In the exchange of fate with the big turtle, Lu Xiaoyi clearly expressed his thoughts. The bridge should go its own way, and the road should go its own way. Living beings had luck, and so should nature. It was hard to imagine that in a world, only creatures like humans had fate, but nature, which nurtured creatures, had no fate. That was not real fate. Real fate should be shared, not only between human beings, but also between human beings and nature. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi finally understood the true meaning of fate. The big turtle finally leaped out of the bamboo shoots. It happily hugged and touched Lu Xiaoyi, passing by him. It didn't leave any power of fate for this human being, but Lu Xiaoyi found that his mass of fate started to have its own color. It was no longer the lifeless grayish black and white. Instead, it had become brightly colored. Although it was still blurry, it was a fundamental change. It was the color that nature had given him. From now on, his fate had an inexplicable connection with the universe, and it would become closer and closer with the progress of his cultivation base and his view of the universe. Until one day, he would be nature, and nature would be him. Coexisting with nature, that was the path, wasn't it? So, would it be more beneficial to selfishly intercept the big turtle's fate? Or would it be more beneficial to choose now? The 5 elements, yin, yang, chaos, and other Tao realms would improve along with his improvement. But without the colors given by nature, where could he find such a chance? Lu Xiai smiled. As expected, it was good to pretend to be weak sometimes. If he didn't pretend to be weak, he would be struck by lightning. Chapter 546. The figure of the big turtle flew higher and higher, and became fainter and fainter. Finally, it melted into the sky. Then, endless spiritual opportunity flooded the entire Hasa star. This will be a long process. It will take at least 1,000 years to determine what kind of balance will be reached in the end. Will it become a middle-level or a high-level world of cultivation? The cultivators of the Hasa star all burst into tears. They fought, and sacrificed for this world. After their hopes were shattered, they regained their hope. Now, what was done could not be changed. The person in front of them had a very complicated feeling in their hearts. Was it hatred? Or gratitude? They couldn't tell. In such a trance, the indifferent voice sounded again. The initiator of this incident will still face the trial of Xianyuan. Xianyuan still has the mining rights of the Hasa star, until the receiver crystal mine withers. As for the specific rules, the next envoy Xianyuan will discuss them with you in detail. My request is that I want to see 70% of the receiver crystals in your warehouse within a month. Send it here. I hope this is an open and honest deal. I don't have the hobby of checking other people's warehouses. Lu Xiai glanced at them calmly. All the cultivators of the Hasa star lowered their heads. No one objected. Lu Xiai floated to the main tunnel and gradually disappeared. He left only one sentence, which made all the cultivators of the Hasa star nervous. The spiritual opportunity has increased. The rules of the Tao of Heaven are complete. So, the heaven's retribution will not stop at Jin Dan. Maybe it's Yuanying? Maybe it's immortal? What needs to be considered is, when a powerful cultivator comes, are you ready? This sentence really pointed to the core, showing the cruelty of the world of cultivation. After upgrading the world and opening the window to the universe, in addition to the foreseeable future, you must first be prepared to welcome the arrival of monsters. Was it so easy to live in a high-level world? If they really met the interstellar bandits of Zhuzhou, the world would be occupied by them. After thousands of years, where would the Hasa star be? Several leading cultivators struggled to gather together. Cultivators' bodies were tough. As long as they didn't die at that time, they could always recover slowly. The realm of Jin Dan was already the backbone of the world of cultivation, and its recovery ability could not be underestimated. They needed to take this opportunity to come up with a plan when everyone was gathered together. There wasn't much time, only 7 or 8 years. And just like what the swordsman said this time, the Xianyuan mining raft wouldn't just take a detour in the sky and leave after receiving the goods. There was a possibility that it would be heavily repaired. If they didn't make preparations now, could it be that there would be another bloody storm after the major repairs? Mr. Yu sighed and said, "Before the whirling cultivators grow up, we need a backer who can protect us on the cosmic level. How long would this take?" She was not the first Yuanying, the first true monarch. Instead, the various orthodoxies had to form a complete chain of systems, forming a pyramid-like cultivation system. Only then could there be an endless stream of high-level cultivators. Not just a flash in the pan. Just like our Chi Eater Foundation establishment, and Jean Dan Chains. Immortal being above the clouds was also very melancholic. They had achieved their goal, but they discovered that this was only the beginning of another difficult period. 3,000 years! It would take at least 3,000 years for us to reach the level of mature Yuanying. There are too many things to consider, such as skills, resources, talents, and experience, and we need to explore them all from scratch. As for the level of true monarch, it's not realistic to think about it now. Therefore, to live completely independently in this universe, without being controlled by others, and to be able to make their own voices, it would take at least 10,000 years. What should we do in the next 10,000 years? Without the protection of the heaven's doom, the whirling star would be defenseless. Zhu Feng spoke bluntly. Why do you have to be so secretive and shy? Except for the Xianyuan in the upper world, do we have any other choice? Even a spare one would be good? Do we? Since we don't, and Xianyuan is powerful, we should all call him father. If a father beats his son, is that revenge? It's a lesson. His words made everyone feel very embarrassed. They had just been beaten up, and now they had to turn around and ask for help. Not to mention cultivators, even mortals with a little courage would not do that. However, they had no other choice. When Zhu Feng said it, it broke the last layer of window paper, and also the last dignity of cultivators. Lu Xiaoyu was finally free. He was experiencing the subtleties of the growth of spiritual vigor in this new flourishing world. To him, the growth of his cultivation was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the changes in the 5 elements. The beginning of his cultivation of the 5 elements was the sword pagoda made by Immortal Rui. After 15 years, he could be considered to have some small achievements. The so-called small achievements were only in the 2 elements of water and fire. He had not learned the other 3 elements yet. His speed of comprehension could only be said to be ordinary. He did not show any special talent in the 5 elements, but he was not a blockhead either. The 5 elements, including yin and yang, were the cornerstones for cultivators to reach the upper world. How high a cultivator could go depended on how hard his foundation was. But here, on the whirling star, he found that he was a little enlightened. His understanding of the mechanism of the 5 elements of all things became sharper. What else could it be? He had been reborn after a trip to the whirling star? Except for the colorful interception of luck in the sea of consciousness, there was no other explanation. Of course, there was also another reason. The spiritual opportunity of the whirling star had just been released, and the rules of the Great Tao had been upgraded. The 5 elements of heaven and earth were in a subtle stage of change. It was this subtle natural change that could make people more able to track the changes. When there were ripples in the stagnant water, it was very difficult to find the regularity in it, because everything was hidden under the surface of the water. With the ability of gold core cultivators, they could not exert the power of the 5 elements, but now, everything was out of nature. The evolution of nature, the rules of nature, had naturally manifested the true essence of the 5 elements with the changes in the world. This was an opportunity. The opportunities given by the Tao of nature were everywhere. It was not necessary to fall into a cave and meet a corpse. After kowtowing a few times, there was a big hole in the ground, and there was a secret book of magic power in it. It was also not necessary to find some kind of natural treasure in exploration and eat it. After eating it, one's power would be greatly improved, and one's mind would be sharper. Originally, one could not understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but after eating it, one could immediately understand calculus, just like the spiritual opportunity of the whirling star this time. If one did not jump for joy and blindly absorb the spiritual opportunity, but thought more about the things behind this change of the world, one would definitely have a unique harvest. The Tao of nature had upgraded, the 5 elements had changed, and yin and yang had been balanced. The Tao of nature had just shown such an opportunity to all the cultivators of the whirling star. As for whether one could do it or not, it was up to one's own luck. The gap between cultivators was also like this, until the difference between clouds and mud. Chapter 547. Lu Xiaoyi seized this opportunity and began to spend all his energy and time on the changes of the 5 elements. He knew that such changes would be the most intense and obvious in the first few years. Then, they would weaken rapidly and stabilize when they weakened to a certain extent. They would continue for hundreds or thousands of years to subtly influence him. However, by then, such small changes might not be something that a small Jin Dan like him would be able to perceive. Therefore, now was not the time to improve his cultivation, nor was it the time to practice his swordsmanship. Now was the best time to comprehend the 5 elements. A cultivator must learn to choose and practice in the most appropriate direction at the most appropriate time. Only then could they achieve twice the results with half the effort. Since he could not swim in the sky, he could only practice flying in the sea to take advantage of the situation. He was practicing under a crooked tree at the top of a small hill at the side of Jianji Mountain. He was all alone and did not build a shelter or a cave. From this position, he could see everything at a glance from the main peak of Jianji Mountain. There were no secrets to speak of. Every day, countless swordsmen would secretly watch from the distant peak, including the Jin Dan swordsman, hoping to learn a move or two from him. To their disappointment, when the swordsman kept his sword, he looked exactly like a cultivator. It was as if his buttocks were smeared with glue. Once he sat down, he did not move at all. Could it be that the swordsman from the upper realm practiced swordsmanship like this? Without drawing his sword, he just waved it in his head. No one dared to ask for guidance. The fact that the swordsman from the upper realm found such a hill beside Jianji Mountain clearly showed his attitude. They were all clever people and understood. Only Qingjiang, the one-armed sword lord Qingjiang, remained at the top of Jianji Mountain like the swordsman from the upper realm. Of course, he no longer allowed others to call him sword lord. How could he have the face to call himself sword lord when he was killed like a dog in the mine? The sword Vane's funeral arrangements had already been made. He was very clear about his fate. If he came down from the raft, he would either be killed or dragged to the upper bound for punishment. However, it did not matter to him anymore. He had already taken everything lightly, except for the burning desire to pursue swordsmanship in his heart. There were too many things he didn't understand. Why was the other person's sword so heavy? It was so heavy that it was unreasonable. It was so heavy that it made people despair. It was so heavy that it felt like he was using a fire stick. He could not be blamed for having such a feeling. To him, Jin Dan was the pinnacle, and he did not have the concept of a sword spirit. This was the lack of a legacy. Xian Yuan was not stupid. He had to be selective about the legacy he left behind. It was like a cat teaching a tiger. The powerful ones would be left behind. Qingjiang is a talented person. He was also a persevering person. He had all the excellent qualities of a swordsman. The only mistake he made was that he was born in the wrong place. He did not choose to regrow his broken arm. Instead, he left this flaw. Was it to remember hatred or to learn a lesson? While he was meditating, he could vaguely feel that the swordsman from the upper bound was practicing something. Although he was not as good as Lu Xiaoyi in terms of swordsmanship, he was much stronger than Lu Xiaoyi in terms of cultivation. It was reasonable for him to notice the inexplicable changes in the 5 elements. During this period, the big and small forces on planet Hassa began to offer their storage crystals to the Sword Rack Mountain. Some of them were of high quality, while some were of lower quality. Anyway, the crystals that were collected by a sect were not that bad. All the sects and forces that were in the space of the mine at that time, as well as those who did not participate but heard about it, as long as they felt that they had a certain level of power, they would obediently offer their treasures. It was not only because of Lu Xiaoyi's abuse of power, but also because of the fact that planet Hassa had leveled up. The door to the world had been opened, and scourges would come one after another. At this time, it would be stupid to care about their small storage. If they really met with unreasonable people, they would not even have a place to cry. This was actually a disguised form of submission and loyalty. Everyone knew that if they offered their treasures, the swordsman might not remember them. However, if they did not offer their treasures, he would definitely remember them. The future of planet Hassa was full of variables, and it would take a long time before they really grew up. Who knew what they would encounter? In this way, the large storage space brought by Lu Xiaoyu was soon filled up. Luckily, the storage crystal was a kind of finely processed material. Although it was precious, it was not the main material of each sword or magic weapon. Otherwise, the mining raft might not be able to be pulled back in one time. Communication became the most embarrassing thing. Lu Xiaoyu could not contact Xianyuan, and he could not fly out of the air layer. He could only look at the sky and sigh. Time moved especially fast in the violent changes of the 5 elements. When such changes began to show signs of slowing down, 8 years had already passed. Lu Xiaoyu had benefited greatly from this process. In view of the foundation he learned from Immortal Rui for 15 years, the combination of fate and nature in the sea of consciousness, and the obvious changes of the 5 elements on planet Hassa, all these factors combined made his progress in the 5 elements a qualitative leap. He succeeded in comprehending all the elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. This was a huge surprise. He thought it would take at least hundreds of years. However, here, on planet Hassa, the changes of the 5 elements complemented each other. It was not like the self-cultivation of cultivators, who did not do it one by one. Instead, it was as a whole, and the changes of the whole were displayed in front of cultivators. There were 5 elements in the sky: water, fire, metal, wood, and earth. They evolved and became everything. They reinforced and counteracted each other, complemented and compensated each other, and circulated naturally. As long as you looked at them as a whole, there was no barrier in a certain line, especially the line of earth, which was very dangerous for cultivators. The difficulty for cultivators to comprehend the 5 elements was that they did not have a suitable environment. They could not understand the regularity of the changes of the 5 elements in nature, because almost every mature world had a stable and restrained mechanism of the 5 elements. It was far less straightforward than planet Hassa when it was just born. In the last year of Lu Xiaoyu's life, he began to practice the escape of the 5 elements. It seemed insignificant and unimportant, but in fact, it provided him with a kind of fighting ability in all kinds of terrains and environments. When he really mastered the escape of the 5 elements, he would not be afraid of water, cave, or deep space. One day, he felt something. He looked up at the sky and saw a green bird sword message whistling down. It was a message that Xuanyuan's mining raft had arrived. A senior was contacting him in outer space. He took out the prepared reply letter. It roughly recorded all kinds of changes in planet Hassa in the past 10 years. It also mentioned that the conditions of planet Hassa had changed because of the upgrade of planet Hassa. The green bird letter flew back to outer space. It could only tell the truth, but it could not make decisions for the senior cultivator. Whether to go down or not, and whether there was still the danger of planet Hassa, it still needed the senior cultivator's judgment. After a while, there was no reply from the green bird. However, there seemed to be a big hole in the sky. A black floating raft came out and went straight to Jianji Mountain. On Jianji Mountain, countless indigenous cultivators of planet Hassa, including swordsmen and law cultivators, gathered here, waiting for the judgment of fate. They knew very well that for the immortal cultivator from the upper world, it did not matter whether they hid or not. Chapter 548. P.S. Jinren, I just want to pay you back today, but you come again in the middle of the night. I'm scared of you, so I'll pay you back right now. The visitor was still foofing, followed by a strange foreign sword Jean Dan. He was unlucky because of his excellent raft-riding skills. In the end, he became a galactic coachman. When he saw Lu Shi, the first thing he said was, 2 hours! I can only stay here for 2 hours. Lu Xiao immediately understood what the old perfected cultivator meant. After all, the spiritual vigor of the whirling star had not recovered for more than 10 years, so it was still in an unstable state. The rules of the way of heaven had not been fully formed, and they were still trying to find a balance point in the collision. Therefore, the heavenly tribulation could not be completely eliminated. If it was the Yuanyingzhenren, it would definitely be better. Therefore, he told the old perfected cultivator everything that happened on the whirling star in detail. Except for the mysterious fate, he did not even hide the fact that he took the initiative to recover the spiritual vigor of the whirling star. He couldn't hide it, because there were so many indigenous people watching. Fufeng didn't say anything. He neither praised nor blamed Lu Shui. Lu Shui's credit was that he found out the cause of the death of the 2 Jin Dan cultivators in Xianyuan. However, he was responsible for the destruction of the last receiver crystal planet in Xianyuan. Without the spiritual vigor and the big turtle, the receiver crystal would lose its source. With the current storage, it would wither within 1,000 years. The old perfected cultivator scanned the Jianjia mountain, the mine, and the terrified indigenous cultivators. Then, he carefully observed the changes of the spiritual vigor of the whirling star and the replacement of the 5 elements. He knew that what was done could not be undone, and the original situation could never be restored. He came here for 2 purposes. One was to get the minerals, and the other was to exchange people. He didn't want to get involved in other things. However, in this situation, he had to come up with a plan. He couldn't go back to the faction to ask for instructions and spend a few years to come back. He had the right and the qualification to do so. After judging the current situation of the whirling star, Fufeng opened his mouth. I have 3 intentions. First, accept the whirling cultivator's allegiance. After all, we can still mine crystals here for at least 1,000 years. I hope that after 1,000 years, we can find a suitable substitute. Secondly, I will bring the cultivators who disrespected Xianyuan back to the 5th ring. The sect will decide their punishment. Finally, after returning this time, I will suggest that the future whirling star will be guarded by Yuanyingzhenren. To ensure their safety. Do you have any objections? The true monarch asked for Jean Dan's opinion. This was very unusual. Jean Dan, who came with him, did not say a word. He knew that this question was not for him, but for Lu Xiaoyi, who had been here for 10 years. Lu Xiaoyi had no objections. Senior is wise. This disciple has nothing to say. Fufeng nodded and sent out a divine will. All the cultivators on the whirling star immediately knelt down. This was the first time that they had seen a true monarch. They did not dare to show any disrespect. In the future, they would have to rely on this leg to survive. They did not delay too much and put a large number of receiver crystals into their space bags. Of course, there were also 4 unlucky cultivators from the whirling star. The one-armed sunken river, the one-legged tumbler, the one-eyed fish master, and the one-eared giant hump. They all used the same trick. They allowed their bodies to be disabled but did not repair them. In fact, they did this so that when the upper-bound cultivators came, they would feel pity for them because they had been punished. Maybe they would be spared. They were very good at playing this trick. They have already arranged the affairs of the school. They are all smart people. They know very well that the current Hassa star is not a real upper-class world of cultivation. Because it is unstable, it can't give birth to a real cultivator of gathering vitality immediately. There will definitely be such a day in the future, but it will be thousands of years later, not now. Now, the only way to reach a higher level was to go to the upper bound. Even if they had to go there to be punished. Each and every one of them was sly and cunning. Zhu Feng even sighed because he had only injured one of his ears. Wasn't this showing his lack of sincerity? However, with so many eyes watching, it was not good for him to hurt himself. It was very regretful. 2 hours passed quickly. When the people and the materials were on the raft, Fufeng asked. The changes of the 5 elements and yin and yang here are obvious. Do you need to stay here for a few more days? The changes of the 5 elements here could not escape the true monarch's perception. Of course, the drastic changes in his perception might be very insignificant in Jean Dan's perception. The reason why the old true monarch said this was not because of the 5 elements. He wanted to give Lu Xiao a reason to stay. It was not clear whether this mission was a success or a failure. If it had to be judged from the result, it would probably be a failure. Although there were some things that the sect would not say, the death of the 2 fake Dan cultivators and the loss of the Ore Star, which had provided precious materials for Xuanyuan's external sword for thousands of years, were incomparable. The key was that this was not an uncontrollable process. Since Lu Xiaoyi could help the sect continue the production of receiver crystals on Whirling Star, why didn't he do it? What was the reason? Was it for personal cultivation or something else? From Fufeng's point of view, as a true monarch, Lu Xiaoyi's choice was undoubtedly correct. This was the choice of a true cultivator. However, since he had joined the sect, he was bound by the group. Sometimes, when he did things, he could not completely act from his own point of view. This was a contradiction between an individual and a group that could never be reconciled. For a cultivator at Fufeng's level to make such a choice, the sect would not say anything about it. With his level and status, the sect had no right to ask a true monarch to change his mind. However, for a puny gold core cultivator like Fufeng to do such a thing and cause the entire sect to have no receiver crystals to use for the next 1,000 years, this was a huge sin. It was precisely because of this that Fufeng gave him a chance to stay. In fact, the sect's hands could not reach here for the time being. They could only rely on the passage of time to dilute this mistake. Then, there would be elders stirring up the muddy water and smoothing out the relationship. If there was a chance to find another mineral star in the future, this mistake was likely to be all talk and no action. Although this was the cultivation world, in fact, some of the methods to deal with conflicts were no different from those in the mortal world. 1 delay, 2 disturbances, turning big problems into small ones, and small ones into nothing. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi understood the old true monarch's intention. However, first of all, he was close to the end of his enlightenment on Whirling Star. There was no point in continuing now. If he wanted to continue improving, he could only use time. Second of all, he was not a person who did not dare to face the responsibility. Maybe he was in the past, but not now. When he made the choice to deal with the surging spiritual vigor on Whirling Star, he did it based on his own state of mind. He did not think much about the problem of the sect's resources being cut off. He only cared about pretending, leaving a pile of sh*t for others to clean up. So what? With the existing mineral resources on Whirling Star, it would not be a problem to mine for thousands of years. If the Qianqiu Peak's treasury was included, it would be easy to hold on for thousands of years. After such a long time, he could not find a replacement. Even if he was responsible, he could at most go to the universe to find a mineral to replace it after he became a nascent soul. It was not a big deal. Since it was clear that he wanted to train him, he had to show his own style of doing things. If you are not afraid of causing trouble, then use me. You have to be able to endure hardships and work according to rules. What are you thinking? You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.